Poison did not arrive at Evelyn Moretti's wedding reception with thunder, gunfire, or a screaming warning. It came in a crystal glass of champagne, carried across a golden ballroom by a man dressed like hotel staff, while a live orchestra played softly beneath chandeliers bright enough to make every lie in the room shine. One moment, New York's most feared Mafia boss was standing beside his bride, calm and untouchable in a black tuxedo, his hand resting at the small of her back like a promise. The next, his enemies were smiling from the shadows, waiting for the woman everyone had mocked to become the only reason he survived the night. Evelyn had imagined fear many times before her wedding day, but not like this. She had imagined walking down the aisle with too many eyes on her size 22 body. She had imagined hearing whispers about her arms, her waist, her hips, the way the white satin curved over places other women were taught to hide. She had imagined her mother's disappointed mouth, her stepsister's sharp little smile, and the cold judgment of socialites who measured women the way jewelers measured diamonds, looking only for cut, shine, and public value. Evelyn had prepared herself for all of that. She had not prepared herself for the strange, quiet wonder of standing in a cathedral filled with roses, while Vincent Moretti looked at her as if no other woman in the world existed. The ceremony had ended without disaster. That alone felt like a miracle. Vincent had taken her hands in front of priests, politicians, judges, old family names, and men with dark suits who never smiled. His voice had been low and steady when he said his vows, but Evelyn had heard the weight beneath them. Vincent was not a man who gave words lightly. His love did not come wrapped in softness. It came like a locked door, a raised wall, a loaded promise that no one would ever reach her without passing through him first. When he slid the ring onto her finger, his thumb lingered against her skin, and for one small breath, Evelyn forgot the size of the room. She forgot the people waiting to judge her. She forgot every cruel voice that had ever told her she was too much and not enough at the same time. Then came the reception at the Waldorf Astoria, where beauty had a price and every smile came polished. The grand ballroom glittered with money. Gold light spilled over tall mirrors, white orchids, crystal towers, silk tablecloths, and champagne poured by silent waiters in white gloves. The guests moved through the room like they were part of an old painting, elegant and careful, pretending not to stare while staring at everything. Mafia wives wore diamonds heavy enough to buy small houses. Politicians laughed too loudly at jokes they did not find funny. Businessmen kissed Vincent's hand with their eyes, while their mouths offered congratulations. Old women with perfect posture watched Evelyn the way judges watched a prisoner. Evelyn stood beside Vincent beneath an arch of white flowers, her wedding gown still clean, her dark hair pinned low at the back of her neck, her cheeks warm from all the attention. The dress had been made just for her. Vincent had insisted on it, not ordered from a bridal shop that treated plus-size women like an afterthought, not forced into fabric meant to apologize for her body, but built around her shape with care. The satin hugged her full chest, narrowed at her waist, then fell in soft waves over her hips. Tiny pearls caught the light each time she breathed. She had cried when she first saw herself in the mirror. Not because she looked thin, because she looked like herself, and for the first time, that had felt beautiful. Vincent noticed the way her fingers curled against her bouquet. He leaned down until his mouth brushed near her ear. "Breathe, my love," he murmured, his voice calm enough to steady her heart. "This room is full of people who wish they had even half your strength." Evelyn tried to smile. "They are all watching me." "Let them," Vincent said. "Tonight they learn." He said it like a simple fact, and that almost made her laugh. Vincent Moretti never begged a room for permission. He entered, and the room adjusted. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and frighteningly still, with black hair combed back from a face too handsome to feel safe. People spoke of him in careful tones. They said he controlled half the city's hidden money, that he owned judges, that enemies vanished after crossing him, that even men who hated him lowered their voices when his name was spoken. But with Evelyn he touched gently. He opened doors. He remembered how she liked her coffee after long hospital shifts. He knew she slept on her left side when she was tired. He knew she hummed old songs while checking medication charts in her head. He knew she was more than a body other people mocked. Across the room, her mother, Marlene, stood beside the champagne tower with a face tight enough to crack. She wore a pale silver gown and the expression of a woman who believed she had been publicly embarrassed by her own daughter's happiness. For most of Evelyn's life, Marlene had acted as if Evelyn's body was a family problem, something to be hidden, managed, corrected, and apologized for. She had praised Evelyn's hands when they cared for strangers, praised her patience when relatives needed help, praised her work when an injured cousin needed medical advice at midnight. But she had never praised Evelyn in a dress, never called her beautiful without adding a suggestion after it, never looked at her full figure without grief or annoyance. Beside Marlene stood Evelyn's stepsister, Celeste, thin, bright, and mean in a rose-colored gown that seemed designed to compete with the bride. Celeste had spent the whole ceremony pretending to wipe tears while quietly checking how many powerful men noticed her. She had always believed she should have been the one chosen by someone like Vincent. In her mind, men with money and danger belonged with women who looked good in photographs, not with trauma nurses who came home with sore feet, tired eyes, and a body that did not shrink itself for anyone. Evelyn saw Celeste whisper something behind her champagne glass. Two women beside her laughed softly. The sound reached Evelyn through the music like a needle sliding under skin. Vincent felt her stiffen. He did not turn his head, but his hand pressed warmer against her back. "Who?" "It's nothing," Evelyn whispered. Vincent's eyes stayed forward, but something in his jaw changed. Nothing does not make you stop breathing. Evelyn looked down at the bouquet in her hands. White roses, pale ribbon. Her fingers looked soft around the stems. For a second, she was 12 years old again, standing in a department store, while her mother whispered that nothing looked right on her. Then she was 16, skipping a school dance because the dress she wanted did not come in her size. Then she was 28, sitting in a break room at the hospital, while another nurse joked that Evelyn must be good at lifting patients because she was built like one. She had survived gunshot wounds, car crashes, grieving families, screaming drunk men in the emergency room, and nights when the hospital felt like it was held together by tape and prayer. But a whisper could still find the old wound. Before she could answer Vincent, Marlene approached with Celeste beside her. They moved through the crowd with practiced grace, smiling at everyone but Evelyn. Marlene kissed the air near Vincent's cheek and touched his sleeve like she wanted witnesses to see how close she stood to power. "Vincent," Marlene said brightly, "what a beautiful event. Truly, no one can say the Moretti family does anything halfway." Vincent gave her a polite nod. It was the kind of politeness that froze instead of warmed. "Marlene." Celeste leaned in next, her perfume sweet and heavy. "Evelyn, the dress is very brave." Evelyn's smile faltered. "Thank you." "I mean it," Celeste said, eyes shining with false innocence. "Most women would be terrified to wear satin with your figure, but you always had courage." Marlene gave a soft, embarrassed laugh, the kind meant to make cruelty seem gentle. "Celeste, don't tease. It is her wedding day." "I'm not teasing," Celeste said. "I think it is inspiring. Vincent clearly does not care what anyone thinks." A silence formed around them. Not wide enough for the whole room yet, but wide enough for the nearest tables to hear. Evelyn felt every word land. She looked at Vincent, but he was no longer looking at Celeste. His gaze had gone quiet. That was the first sign of danger. Vincent's anger did not rise like fire. It deepened like water in a dark well. Marlene touched Evelyn's arm, fingers light but cold. "You must understand, darling. People are surprised. A man like Vincent has enemies everywhere. They expect him to choose someone who strengthens his image, someone polished, someone who fits beside him easily." Evelyn pulled her arm back. "I am standing beside him." "Yes," Marlene said, her smile tightening, "but standing is one thing, belonging is another." Vincent moved then, just slightly, placing himself closer to Evelyn. It was not dramatic. He did not raise his voice, but the men near the wall noticed. His guards noticed. The orchestra seemed to soften without being told. Celeste, foolish with jealousy, kept going. "You have to admit people are talking." Some of the wives said it makes Vincent look sentimental, like marriage made him careless. Vincent turned his head toward her. Who said that? Celeste blinked. For the first time that evening, her smile lost shape. I was only repeating what people are whispering. Then repeat names. Marlene's face paled. Vincent, please, we are family now. Celeste meant no harm. No, Vincent said softly. She meant harm. She simply thought I would tolerate it because she wrapped it in perfume. The little circle around them grew still. Evelyn's heart beat hard. Part of her wanted to touch Vincent's sleeve and ask him to let it go. That was the old habit. Keep peace. Smile, swallow the hurt. Pretend the joke did not cut deep. But another part of her, a tired and quiet part that had been patient for too many years, stayed silent. She wanted to hear what would happen when someone finally refused to laugh along. Vincent reached for a champagne glass from a passing waiter. Though he did not drink, he held it loosely between his fingers and turned toward the ballroom. His presence changed the room before his voice did. Conversations thinned. Laughter died. Heads turned. People sensed that the air had shifted, that the reception had crossed some invisible line from celebration into judgment. "May I have your attention?" Vincent said. He did not shout. He did not need to. The whole ballroom fell into silence as if someone had lowered a glass dome over it. Evelyn looked up at him, her throat tight. Vincent stood beneath the chandeliers with one hand around the untouched glass and the other resting openly at Evelyn's waist. Not hiding her, not placing her behind him, holding her beside him where everyone could see. "I have heard many whispers tonight," he said. "Some from strangers. Some from people who should have known better. There are guests in this room who believe my wife is not the woman they expected me to choose. They believe her body makes her ordinary. They believe her softness makes me weak. They believe that because they have lived small lives with small minds, they are qualified to measure the worth of the woman standing beside me." Evelyn's eyes burned. She tried to lower her gaze, but Vincent's hand firmed gently against her waist, keeping her anchored. He continued, voice calm and cutting. "Let me make this very clear. Evelyn is not my mistake. She is not my compromise. She is not my shame. She is the woman who has spent years saving lives while many of you spent your lives saving face. She has held dying people with steadier hands than most men in this room could manage while holding a glass. She has walked into blood, fear, grief, and screaming chaos, and she has not once asked the world to praise her for it." Marlene looked frozen. Celeste's lips parted, but no sound came out. Around the room, the Mafia wives stopped pretending not to listen. The politicians looked down at their plates. Vincent's enemies watched with careful eyes, trying to decide whether this declaration made him stronger or easier to wound. Vincent raised Evelyn's hand and kissed her wedding ring. "This woman is my wife, my family, my queen. Anyone who insults her insults me. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects the Moretti name, and anyone foolish enough to mistake her kindness for weakness will learn how dangerous it is to be wrong." The silence after his words felt alive. Evelyn could hear the soft tremble of a violin string. She could hear her own breath. She could hear a fork being set down somewhere near the back of the room. Then, one by one, people lowered their eyes. Not all in love, not all in respect, some in fear. But they lowered them. Vincent turned back to her, and the darkness in his face softened. "Dance with me." Evelyn stared at him. After that, especially after that, he set the glass down untouched on a nearby tray and led her into the center of the ballroom. The orchestra began again, slower this time, almost dreamlike. Evelyn felt every stare as Vincent took her into his arms, but something had changed. The eyes no longer felt like knives. They felt like distant lamps, watching from far away while she stood in the only warmth that mattered. Vincent guided her carefully, one hand at her back, the other holding hers. He moved like a man used to danger, but with her he was patient. He let her find the rhythm. He let the gown sweep across the floor. He let the whole city watch him adore the woman they had tried to shrink. For a few minutes, Evelyn allowed herself to believe the worst had passed. She felt wonder, quiet and fragile, rising inside her chest. Maybe this was what safety felt like. Not the absence of cruelty, but the presence of someone who would not let cruelty stand unchallenged. She looked at Vincent's face, at the sharp lines softened only for her, and thought about the life waiting beyond this room. A home, a marriage, long mornings after night shifts, his world and hers meeting somewhere between danger and healing. Then she saw the waiter again. He stood near the far side of the ballroom, too still, holding a silver tray with fresh champagne. Evelyn noticed him because nurses noticed details when everyone else noticed drama. His jacket fit badly across the shoulders. His gloves were too clean for someone who had been serving all night. His eyes did not move like hotel staff eyes. They did not scan for empty glasses or raised hands. They watched Vincent. Evelyn's body tightened. Vincent felt it. "What is it?" "I don't know," she whispered. The waiter began moving toward them. Evelyn's training stirred under her skin, not fully awake yet, but rising. She watched his hands. She watched the tray. She watched the way one glass sat slightly apart from the others, a little closer to his thumb. A simple thing, almost nothing. But trauma nurses lived in the land of almost nothing. A small change in breathing, a strange color around the lips, a half-second delay in response. Almost nothing was where death liked to hide. Before she could speak, a senior Moretti captain stepped forward and accepted 2 glasses from the tray. One for himself, one for Vincent. The waiter bowed his head and moved away. Evelyn kept watching. The captain handed Vincent the champagne with a smile. "To your bride, boss." Vincent took the glass. Evelyn's hand closed around his wrist before he could raise it. The captain laughed softly. "Protective already?" Vincent looked at Evelyn instead of the man. "Eve?" Her eyes were on the champagne. The bubbles rose too slowly. The scent was almost hidden beneath the sweetness, but something bitter slipped through. Almond? Maybe. Metal? Maybe. Not enough for certainty, enough for fear. "Don't drink that," she whispered. Vincent did not question her. He lowered the glass at once, but the captain beside him had already taken a swallow from his own. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the captain's smile broke. His hand went to his throat. His knees softened. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the marble floor, the sound cracking through the music, like ice splitting on a frozen lake. The ballroom gasped. Vincent turned toward him, and that was when the first scream rose from the east doors. Another waiter dropped his tray and pulled a gun from beneath his jacket. A second man near the dessert table shoved a security guard into the flower display. The orchestra stopped mid-note. Guests surged from their chairs. Someone shouted Vincent's name. Someone else yelled for the exits. The golden ballroom became a storm of silk, glass, fear, and running feet. Vincent pushed Evelyn behind him by instinct, one hand moving toward the weapon hidden beneath his jacket. But as he turned, the original waiter appeared from the crowd, holding a second glass in his hand. He threw the liquid toward Vincent's face. Vincent jerked back, but some of it hit his mouth, his jaw, the side of his neck. Evelyn heard herself scream his name. Vincent shot the attacker in the shoulder before the man could reach for another weapon. The waiter fell hard, but Vincent staggered. Just 1 step. Barely enough for anyone else to notice. Evelyn noticed everything. His pupils tightened, his breathing changed, his hand went flat against his chest. The soft fear inside Evelyn became ice. "Vincent," she said. He tried to answer, but his mouth worked without sound. The most feared man in New York, the man who could silence a ballroom with 1 sentence, suddenly looked confused by his own body. He reached for her, and she caught him as his weight dipped. Around them, the room exploded into chaos. Moretti guards dragged guests away from the center of the ballroom. Men shouted into radios. Celeste screamed near the champagne tower. Marlene stood frozen, both hands over her mouth. But Evelyn heard none of them clearly. Her world narrowed to Vincent's skin, his pulse, his breathing, the strange tightness in his jaw, the faint tremor starting in his hands. She lowered him carefully to the floor, ignoring the ripping sound as part of her wedding gown tore beneath her knees. Her veil slid from her hair. Champagne and broken glass glittered around them. Vincent's eyes locked onto hers, furious and frightened, not for himself, but because she was still in danger. "Stay with me," Evelyn said. her voice changing into the calm, clear tone she used in the trauma bay when panic could not be allowed to live. "Look at me. Vincent, do not close your eyes." His hand found her wrist. His grip was weaker than it should have been. A guard dropped beside her. "Mrs. Moretti, we need to move him." "No," Evelyn said sharply. "Not yet. Tell your men to seal the exits and call emergency services, but he does not move until I know what this is." The guard stared at her, startled. Evelyn looked up, blood and champagne staining the white satin at her knees, her face no longer soft with fear. "Now." He obeyed. Vincent's breathing hitched. Evelyn leaned over him, one hand at his pulse, the other opening his collar. Her mind moved fast, clean, trained by years of crisis. Poison, contact or ingestion. Fast onset. Breathing affected. Possible nerve agent. Possible cardiac toxin. She needed time. She needed equipment. She needed the room to stop spinning around her. And then, through the chaos, she saw one of the fallen attackers move. He was not running. He was crawling toward them with a small blade hidden against his wrist, eyes fixed on Vincent's exposed side. None of the guards saw him. They were turned toward the doors, fighting the second wave of panic. Evelyn looked at the man. The man looked at her. For one breath, the woman everyone had mocked knelt between a dying Mafia king and the enemy sent to finish him. Her gown was torn. Her hands were shaking. Her body, the same body they had whispered about all night, was the only wall left. The assassin lunged. Evelyn moved first. The assassin lunged, and Evelyn did not think about fear. She did not think about the white gown tearing under her knees, or the room full of people who had whispered about her body only minutes before, or the cold flash of the blade cutting toward the man she loved. Her world became simple. Vincent was on the floor behind her, fighting for breath, and the man in front of her meant to finish what the poison had started. Evelyn threw herself sideways with every ounce of strength she had spent years apologizing for. Her shoulder slammed into the assassin's chest, hard enough to knock the air from his lungs, and the blade missed Vincent by less than an inch. The man crashed against the marble with a sharp grunt, but he recovered fast, twisting beneath her, trying to bring the knife up again. Evelyn caught his wrist with both hands. His arms shook with effort. Her arms shook too. But she had spent years moving unconscious patients, holding down panicked men twice her size, lifting bodies from gurneys, bracing herself through 12-hour shifts when her feet burned and her back screamed. This man expected a frightened bride. He did not expect a trauma nurse who knew exactly how much pressure a human wrist could take before the hand opened. "Drop it," Evelyn said, her voice low and fierce. He spat something at her, trying to buck her off, but Evelyn shifted her weight and pinned his arm beneath her knee. The knife clattered across the marble. A Moretti guard turned just in time to see her drive her elbow into the attacker's ribs and hold him there, breathing hard, her veil half torn, her pearls scattered across the floor like tiny white stars. For one strange second, the entire ballroom seemed to freeze around her. The woman they had mocked for taking up space was using that space to protect the most dangerous man in New York. The guard rushed forward and dragged the assassin away, twisting his arms behind his back. Evelyn did not watch him go. She crawled back to Vincent, whose face had turned pale beneath the sharp lines of his jaw. His eyes were open, but they were not focused the way they should have been. His breathing came shallow and uneven, and his fingers kept tightening and loosening against the ruined fabric of her dress. "Vincent, listen to me," Evelyn said, placing one hand against his cheek. "Stay with my voice. I need you to stay awake." His lips moved. No sound came out. "I know," she whispered, forcing calm into every word even as her heart was breaking. "I know you're angry. Be angry later. Right now, breathe." Around them, the ballroom was still a living storm. Guests cried behind overturned tables. Security men shouted into radios. Someone had finally pulled a fire alarm, and the thin, pulsing sound cut through the room like a warning from another world. But Evelyn's training gave her a tunnel through the chaos. She checked Vincent's pulse again. Too fast, then uneven. His skin was damp. His pupils were wrong. The poison was moving quickly, attacking his body before anyone else could understand what was happening. "Get me oxygen," she shouted. "A medical kit now." and find out if this hotel has an emergency cart on this floor." A young guard stared at her, his gun still raised, his face blank with shock. Evelyn snapped her head toward him. "Move," he moved. Another guard knelt near Vincent, his face hard but frightened. "Mrs. Moretti, the ambulance is on the way, but the streets are locked down. There are cars blocking the front entrance." "Then clear them," Evelyn said. "And bring me anyone who can carry equipment, not anyone who wants to stand here looking important." The guard nodded once and ran. Evelyn pulled the napkin from the table beside her and wiped the liquid from Vincent's mouth and jaw. She leaned close, listening to his breathing, then turned his head carefully to keep his airway clear. The first glass had taken down his captain fast, and the second had splashed against Vincent's face. Some had touched his lips, some had soaked into his skin. Evelyn did not know the exact poison yet, but she knew enough to fight the first battle. Keep him breathing. Keep his heart working. Keep panic away from her hands. Marlene appeared a few feet away, pale and trembling, with Celeste clinging to her arm. Neither of them looked cruel now. They looked small, human, terrified. "Evelyn," Marlene whispered. "What can we do?" Evelyn did not look up from Vincent's pulse. "Stay back unless I ask you for something." Celeste's voice shook. "Is he going to die?" Evelyn's hand froze for half a second, then she looked up. The expression on her face made Celeste step back. "No," Evelyn said. "Not tonight." A hotel security officer arrived with a red emergency bag. Evelyn tore it open, searching quickly. Basic supplies. Not enough, but enough to begin. She fitted an oxygen mask over Vincent's face and adjusted the flow with fingers that refused to shake. When his chest rose a little stronger, she felt the first small spark of hope. Then one of Vincent's older men came running with a black medical case, the kind no hotel would keep, heavy and locked with a thumbprint scanner. The man pressed his thumb against it and opened it beside her. "The boss keeps emergency supplies with his security detail," he said, "for shootings, poison, anything." "Good," Evelyn said, already searching. "Then for once his paranoia is useful." The man blinked, almost startled into a laugh, but Evelyn had no time for humor. She found what she needed, not everything, but enough to slow the poison and keep Vincent alive until more help came. She worked with the quiet speed of someone who had done impossible things in bright hospital rooms, while families prayed behind glass. She gave orders. She monitored his breathing. She made the men around her useful. No one questioned her now. Not the guards, not the Mafia captains, not the socialites pressed against the wall with tears streaking their perfect makeup. Evelyn had become the center of the ballroom, and every person in it obeyed the rhythm of her voice. Vincent's hand found hers again. His grip was still weak, but it was there. "That's it," she whispered. "Hold on to me." His eyes moved, finally finding her. In them, beneath the pain and confusion, she saw fury. It was not fear of death. Vincent Moretti had lived too close to death to be surprised by it. It was rage that someone had brought death to their wedding. Rage that someone had put Evelyn in the middle of it. Rage that his body would not obey him when she was kneeling in glass and blood beside him. Evelyn brushed her thumb against his knuckles. "Don't you dare try to get up." His mouth curved faintly beneath the oxygen mask. Even poisoned, even half-conscious, Vincent heard her. The ambulance crew reached them through a service entrance 9 minutes later, guided by armed Moretti men who looked ready to carry the whole hospital if Evelyn asked them to. The paramedics paused when they saw the ballroom, the shattered glass, the restrained attackers, the unconscious captain, and the bride kneeling over Vincent like a battlefield angel. Evelyn gave them a rapid report before they could ask. She told them what had happened, what symptoms she had seen, what she had already done, and what she suspected. Her voice was clear, professional, and exact. One of the paramedics stared at her dress. "Your medical trauma nurse," Evelyn said, "and his wife." That was enough. They loaded Vincent onto a stretcher, and Evelyn rose with him. Her legs trembled when she stood, but she refused to fall. Blood, champagne, and crushed petals marked the front of her gown. Her hair had come loose around her face. Her veil was gone. One sleeve had torn near the shoulder. She looked nothing like the polished bride who had entered the ballroom. She looked stronger, As the stretcher rolled toward the service corridor, Vincent's hand reached blindly off the side. Evelyn took it at once. "I'm here," she said. "I'm not leaving." A Moretti captain stepped in her path. "Mrs. Moretti, the car is secure. We can move you separately." Evelyn looked at him. "I said I'm not leaving." He stepped aside. The ride to Vincent's private medical facility blurred into red lights, sirens, and Vincent's fingers locked weakly around hers. Evelyn stayed beside him, speaking softly even when she did not know if he could hear. She told him he was doing well. She told him to breathe. She told him if he survived an army of enemies only to die after one sip of wedding champagne, she would never forgive him. At that, his fingers tightened once, and she nearly cried from relief. By dawn, Vincent was alive, not healed. Not safe, but alive. He lay in a private room behind reinforced doors, surrounded by machines, armed guards, and the quiet hum of expensive medical equipment. The poison had been slowed before it could finish its work. The doctors told Evelyn that her quick response had saved his life. They said it carefully, as if they did not fully understand that she already knew. She had felt it in every second she fought for him. She had held the door shut while death pushed from the other side. Vincent slept through most of the morning, pale but breathing on his own. Evelyn sat beside his bed in a borrowed robe, her ruined wedding dress folded over a chair in the corner like evidence from another life. Nurses came and went, doctors checked monitors. Moretti men moved like shadows in the hallway. Every time someone tried to convince her to rest, she looked at Vincent and refused. Near noon, Vincent opened his eyes. Evelyn was leaning forward, elbows on her knees, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of untouched coffee. When she saw him watching her, her whole face changed. Relief passed through her so sharply it looked like pain. "Hi," she whispered. Vincent's voice came out rough. "You're hurt." She laughed once, soft and disbelieving. "That is the first thing you say?" His eyes moved over her face, her hands, the bandage wrapped around her forearm where glass had cut her. "You're hurt," he repeated, angrier this time. "I'm fine." He tried to sit up. Evelyn placed one firm hand on his chest and pushed him back against the pillow. "Do not make me fight you too." Vincent stared at her, and slowly, through the exhaustion and poison still leaving his body, something warm entered his eyes. "You saved me, yes. You stopped the man with the knife. Yes, you gave orders to my men. Yes." A faint smile touched his mouth. "How many of them looked scared? All of them." "Good." For a moment, they simply looked at each other. The room was quiet except for the machines and the soft air moving through the vents. Then Vincent lifted his hand with effort and touched her cheek. His thumb moved gently under her eye. "I promised the city you were my queen," he said. "Then you proved I had understated it." Evelyn closed her eyes against the tears. She had been strong all night, but his tenderness almost broke her. "I was so scared, I know. I thought I was going to lose you. You didn't." "No," she whispered. "I didn't." His gaze sharpened. "Who did it?" The softness in the room cooled. Evelyn reached for the folder on the side table. She had not spent the morning only waiting. While Vincent slept, she had spoken to guards, hotel staff, paramedics, and the one captured attacker who had been frightened enough to talk when Evelyn stood in front of him wearing a robe over a blood-stained slip and asked simple questions. She had noticed things the men missed because they were looking for weapons, and she was looking for behavior. The waiter who carried the glass had entered through a service corridor that required a private access card. The champagne bottle had been switched from a table assigned only to Vincent's inner circle. The attackers knew exactly when Vincent would be exposed during the toast. Someone inside the guest list had opened the door. Vincent watched her as she opened the folder. "Adrian Vey," Evelyn said. Vincent's expression did not change, but the air around him did. Adrian Vale was a billionaire hotel investor, a political donor, and one of the men who had smiled too warmly at Evelyn during the reception. He had spent years pretending to be friendly with the Moretti family, while quietly building ties with a rival clan from Boston. He had also been one of the loudest voices whispering that Vincent had weakened himself by marrying her. "He gave them access?" Vincent asked. "Yes, through the hotel's private event system. He arranged staff substitutions 2 days before the wedding. He also paid one of the champagne suppliers to prepare a special bottle for your table. Vincent's jaw hardened. How do you know? Evelyn placed a phone on the bed beside him, because the captured attacker had messages. Your men were looking for names. I was looking for timing. Adrian's assistant sent the final confirmation 16 minutes before the toast. Vincent looked at the phone, then back at her. Evelyn's voice lowered. He thought everyone would blame a rival attack. He thought in the panic, no one would notice the person who opened the door from inside. Vincent was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Bring him." The command traveled through the building like electricity. By sunset, Adrian Vale stood in the private recovery room, flanked by 2 Moretti guards. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his silver hair no longer perfectly combed, and his face carried the wounded dignity of a rich man who had never believed consequences were meant for him. He looked at Vincent in the hospital bed, then at Evelyn standing beside him in a simple black dress someone had brought from the house. The dress was not bridal. It was plain, soft, and elegant. It fit her body without apology. "Vincent," Adrian said carefully, "this is a misunderstanding." Vincent did not speak. Adrian looked at Evelyn instead, perhaps thinking she would be easier. That was his final mistake. "You should be resting, my dear," he said. "After such a terrible night, your emotions must be overwhelming." Evelyn stepped forward. "My emotions are fine." Adrian smiled thinly. "You are a nurse, I respect that. But this is not a hospital matter. These things are complicated." "No," Evelyn said. "A man in a fake uniform carried poisoned champagne into my wedding reception. Because you gave him access, that is not complicated." His smile faded. She continued, calm and steady. "You chose the Waldorf because your company has a private service contract there. You changed the staff list. You moved one of Vincent's assigned servers to another floor. You arranged for a bottle to be marked with a gold ribbon, so the attacker would know which glass to hand him. You did all of that because you thought Vincent loving me made him careless." Adrian's eyes flickered. Vincent saw it. So did every guard in the room. "You thought I was a weakness," Evelyn said. "You thought people would laugh at me, Vincent would be distracted, and the room would be too busy judging my body to notice your betrayal." Adrian swallowed. "You have no proof that would hold anywhere." Evelyn smiled then, but there was no sweetness in it. "I am not trying you in court." For the first time, Adrian looked afraid. Vincent's voice came from the bed, quiet and rough. "My wife decides." Adrian turned toward him. "Vincent, be reasonable." Vincent's eyes were cold. "You tried to kill me at my own wedding. Reasonable died in the ballroom." Evelyn looked at the guards. The room waited. It was a strange thing, that silence. The kind of silence she had never been given growing up. No one interrupted her, no one corrected her, no one told her she was being dramatic, emotional, or too sensitive. They waited because her word mattered. "Adrian Vale is finished in New York," Evelyn said. "Every hotel contract, every political favor, every private club, every board seat. Gone. By morning, no one takes his calls. By next week, he leaves the city with whatever Vincent allows him to keep. If he ever returns, he answers to me first." Adrian's face went gray. "You can't do that." Evelyn held his gaze. "Watch me." Vincent's mouth curved faintly, but he said nothing. He did not need to. The guards took Adrian by the arms and walked him out. His protests faded down the hall, smaller with every step. 3 days later, the newspapers called it a private security incident. The society pages called the wedding unforgettable. The politicians called to express concern. The Mafia wives sent flowers, gifts, and careful handwritten notes addressed not only to Vincent but to Evelyn. By the end of the week, Adrian Vale had resigned from every board he sat on. His penthouse was listed for sale. His allies denied knowing him. His enemies did not bother hiding their smiles. New York understood the message before anyone said it out loud. Vincent Moretti's bride had not hidden behind him. She had saved him. She had judged the traitor. She had spoken, and powerful men had moved. When Vincent finally returned home, Evelyn stood in the bedroom of their townhouse, looking at the wedding dress hanging near the window. It had been cleaned as much as possible, but some marks would never leave. A faint shadow near the hem. a tear near the knee, a few missing pearls. It no longer looked perfect. It looked like the truth. Vincent came up behind her, slower than usual but steady. His arms wrapped around her waist and he rested his chin near her shoulder. "I'll buy you another," he said. Evelyn looked at the dress. "No, no, I want to keep this one." His arms tightened gently. "Why?" She touched the torn satin. "Because this is the dress I wore when I stopped being afraid of the room." Vincent turned her in his arms. His face was still tired, still marked by what he had survived, but his eyes were alive and fixed only on her. "You were never ordinary, Evelyn." "I know that now," she whispered. He bent and kissed her, slow and careful, not like a man claiming a prize, but like a man honoring the person who had dragged him back from the edge of death. Evelyn leaned into him, her hands resting against his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath her palm. The sound filled her with a quiet wonder deeper than any applause. A month later they held a second reception, smaller, darker, more private. Not because Evelyn was hiding, but because she no longer needed a ballroom full of strangers to witness her worth. Still, the most powerful people in New York came. They came because Vincent invited them. But they lowered their eyes because Evelyn entered beside him. She wore deep red silk this time, custom-made for her body, with her shoulders bare and her head high. Her mother stood near the back, quiet and uncertain. Celeste did not laugh. None of the Mafia wives whispered. None of the men smiled with pity. Vincent raised a glass of water, not champagne, and the room understood the private joke without daring to laugh. He looked at Evelyn before he looked at anyone else. "To my wife," he said, "the woman who saved my life, my name, and my city." Evelyn took his hand, feeling every eye on her. Once that attention would have made her shrink inside herself. Now it moved over her and fell away. She had learned something the hard way, in broken glass and fear and blood-stained satin. The world would always try to decide what kind of woman deserved love, power, beauty, and respect. But the world was often wrong. She looked across the room at the same kind of people who had once mocked her. Wealthy women with diamond throats, men with cold eyes, relatives who had confused cruelty with honesty, enemies who had thought her body made her harmless. One by one, they looked away first. Vincent leaned close, his voice only for her. "They understand now." Evelyn smiled. "No, they are beginning to." And that was enough, because Evelyn Moretti was no longer the bride people pitied, questioned, or laughed at behind crystal glasses. She was the trauma nurse who turned a ballroom into an emergency room. The woman who used the strength they mocked to hold back death. The wife who saw poison before the killers saw failure. The queen who removed a traitor from the city with one calm sentence. By the end, no one remembered the whispers the way they had been spoken. They remembered the silence that came after. They remembered Vincent Moretti lying on the marble and Evelyn kneeling beside him like the only force in the room that could command life to stay. They remembered the torn gown, the steady hands, the assassin on the floor, and the way the city's most feared man looked at his wife when he woke again. And from that night forward, whenever someone in New York spoke of Vincent Moretti's marriage, no one said he had chosen weakness. No one said he had risked his empire for love. No one said he had married beneath himself. They said Vincent Moretti had survived because he married Evelyn. And Evelyn was not his weakness. She was his queen. 500 armed men stood outside St. Helena Cathedral, like the city itself had been ordered not to breathe. Their black suits made two perfect walls along the wide marble steps, their hands folded in front of them, their eyes hidden behind dark glasses, their faces still as stone. No one talked. No one smoked. No one shifted their weight. They simply waited while the bells above the cathedral counted down to noon, each deep note rolling across Manhattan like a warning. Inside, the air was heavy with candle smoke, white roses, expensive perfume, and the quiet fear of people who had spent their whole lives pretending fear belonged only to weaker men. Every seat was filled. Mafia families sat beside judges. Governors sat beside bankers. Foreign investors whispered to men who had once ordered bodies dropped into rivers. People who would normally cross the street to avoid one another had gathered beneath the painted ceiling of God's house for one reason. Matteo Romano was getting married. For 15 years, Matteo Romano had ruled New York without ever raising his voice in public. He did not need to shout. His silence carried more weight than most men's threats. Some called him a criminal. Some called him a king. Some called him the ghost under the city. The man whose name could make a construction bid disappear, a port inspection vanish, a judge reconsider, or a governor pick up the phone before it finished ringing. At 41, Matteo controlled shipping docks, casinos, hotel towers, private clubs, political favors, union contracts, and secrets that could ruin men who smiled on television every night. He had built an empire out of money, patience, and fear. He was known for being brilliant. He was known for being ruthless. He was known for seeing traps before they closed, and he was known, most of all, for never letting anyone see him bleed. He waited at the altar in a black suit cut so perfectly it seemed carved around him. The fabric fell sharp over his shoulders, the white shirt beneath it spotless, the silver cufflinks at his wrists quiet and expensive. His dark hair was brushed back from his face, showing the hard lines of a man who had survived too much and forgiven almost nothing. His wheelchair was made of polished black metal, elegant and custom-built, the kind of chair designed for a man who refused pity so completely that even the object meant to help him move looked like a throne. 10 years earlier, an ambush outside a private club in Queens had changed his body forever. 3 bullets had torn through the car. 1 had shattered his spine, and the city had held its breath waiting for him to fall. But Matteo had not fallen. He had returned colder, quieter, sharper. The men who had celebrated his weakness were buried before winter. The bride was supposed to arrive at noon. Everyone knew the timing because everything around Matteo Romano happened exactly when he decided it would happen. The orchestra began the processional. The priest lifted his eyes. Cameras from approved news crews pointed toward the back of the cathedral. 1,000 white roses climbed the pillars like snow caught in stone. The heavy doors were supposed to open. They did not. The music continued, uncertain now, still beautiful, but thinning around the edges. A few guests turned their heads. Someone coughed. A woman in pearls pressed gloved fingers to her mouth. Matteo did not move. His face remained calm, not angry, not afraid, not embarrassed. Only Nico Bellini, his closest advisor and the only man in the room allowed to stand near him with a weapon, noticed the slight tightening of Matteo's hand on the armrest of his chair. Nico leaned down, just enough for his voice to disappear beneath the music. "She is late." Matteo's eyes stayed on the closed doors. Brides are often late. Not yours. The orchestra reached the end of the song and looped clumsily back into the beginning. That was when the first real whisper moved through the cathedral. It started in the back pews, slipped between silk shoulders and stiff collars, then drifted toward the front like smoke. Matteo heard it. Of course he heard it. He heard everything. The wedding was not just a wedding. It was a public declaration that the Romano family and the De Luca family were joining power, blood, money, and protection. Sofia De Luca was not only supposed to become his wife, she was supposed to become proof that Matteo Romano, even seated in a chair, was still strong enough to command loyalty from one of the oldest families in the city. Nico touched the small earpiece hidden beneath his collar. "Find her." Security moved at once. Not loudly, not dramatically. Men simply rose from side pews and vanished through hidden doors, as if swallowed by the cathedral walls. The orchestra played softer. The priest looked down at his Bible, though he was no longer reading. Matteo waited. His stillness became its own kind of danger. No one wanted to be the first person to look amused, but some of them could not help themselves. His enemies had come dressed in respect, but their eyes were hungry. They had wanted a crack in his armor for years. They had prayed for it, paid for it, whispered about it in back rooms, and now it seemed as if a bride in white had given them one. Near the back entrance, Liana Brooks stood with a silver tray of untouched champagne glasses balanced against one soft hip. She was a temporary server, hired for one day because the caterer needed extra hands and Liana needed the money. Her black uniform was plain, tight in places it was not supposed to be tight, and stiff around her arms. She had spent the morning being invisible in the way people made fat women invisible when they wanted service but not presence. They reached past her. They snapped fingers near her shoulder. They looked at the tray before they looked at her face. Sometimes their eyes paused on her body with that quick little judgment people thought no one noticed. Liana noticed. She always noticed. She noticed more than bodies. She noticed moods. She noticed the tremor in a senator's hand when a man from the docks whispered in his ear. She noticed the way two rival families avoided eye contact but sent messages through their wives. She noticed Nico Bellini's jaw harden before he gave the order. She noticed the orchestra losing confidence. And she noticed Matteo Romano at the altar, sitting alone beneath a ceiling full of saints, surrounded by hundreds of people who feared him and not one person who seemed to understand him. Then Nico returned. He bent close to Matteo's ear. Liana was too far away to hear the first words, but she saw their weight land. She saw Nico's mouth barely move. She saw Matteo's fingers stop tightening and become perfectly still. "She's gone," Nico said, quiet enough for only the front rows to hear, but somehow the cathedral seemed to understand before the words spread. A cold silence opened through the room. Nico continued, his voice lower. The cameras were cut for 7 minutes. Someone helped her leave through the east entrance. For the first time all morning, Matteo lowered his eyes. Only for 1 second. It was so quick most people missed it. Liana did not. She saw the flicker, not of surprise, but of something far more painful. Not heartbreak, exactly. Matteo did not look like a man who had expected love. He looked like a man who had expected loyalty, and had been handed a knife in front of everyone who wanted to see him weak. The whispers changed. They became sharper, warmer, crueler. Someone near Liana, a man with slick silver hair and a smile thin as paper, leaned toward his companion and said just loud enough to travel. Maybe the girl finally realized she did not want to spend her life pushing half a husband around. A few people laughed. Not many. Just enough. The sound moved through Liana like a match tossed into dry grass. She looked down at the tray in her hands. The champagne trembled slightly against the crystal. She thought of her father, Henry Brooks, who had lost his leg when she was 16 after a drunk driver ran a red light and left him trapped inside a crushed taxi. She remembered the way people had changed after that. Not all at once. Slowly. Strangers spoke louder to him, as if losing a leg had made him hard of hearing. Family members praised him for doing ordinary things, as if living had become a performance. Women who had flirted with him at church suddenly touched his shoulder with pity instead of desire. Men asked questions about pain before they asked about his work. And when he danced in the kitchen with Liana's mother, people called it inspiring instead of beautiful. Liana knew what shame looked like when a room tried to place it on someone else's body. She set the tray down on a small table beside the back pew. A guard immediately stepped in front of her. He was tall, hard-faced, and young enough to think obedience was the same as wisdom. "Miss, go back to work." Liana's heart was beating so hard she felt it in her throat. "I just need a moment." No. She could have stepped back. Every sensible part of her told her to step back. She was a server in borrowed black shoes. She was nobody in a room where everybody had a last name that opened doors or closed graves. But Matteo was still at the altar, surrounded by people waiting to see what humiliation would do to him. The cruel man near the back was still smiling, and something in Liana, something tired and old and done being careful, lifted its head. She looked past the guard and met Matteo Romano's eyes. It should have frightened her. Maybe it did. His gaze was dark, unreadable, and steady as a locked door. But it was also the first time all day she had seen someone at the altar look back at her as if she were not furniture, not a tray, not a body to be judged and moved aside, but a person. The guard began to turn, annoyed by her silence. Matteo raised one finger. The guard stepped aside. Every head in the cathedral turned as Liana Brooks walked down the aisle. Her shoes made soft sounds against the marble. She felt the eyes land on her body first, as they always did. She could hear the silent questions. Who was she? Why was she walking toward him? Why was a woman like her entering the center of a room built for wealth, beauty, power, and blood? Her cheeks burned, but she kept walking. She passed rows of men who had ordered murders with less hesitation than she had ordering coffee. She passed women wearing diamonds that could pay her rent for 20 years. She passed Nico Bellini, whose hand moved slightly toward his jacket until Matteo's eyes told him not to. Liana stopped in front of the most feared man in New York. Up close, Matteo was even more imposing. Not because of his size, though his shoulders were broad, and his presence filled the space around him. It was the stillness. Most men filled silence because they were afraid of what it might reveal. Matteo let silence serve him. Liana swallowed, suddenly aware of every inch of herself, the tight sleeves of her uniform, the softness of her stomach, the little tremble in her fingers. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "No one deserves to be left alone like this." Matteo studied her for a long moment. His voice, when it came, was low and smooth, almost gentle, but there was steel under it. "You should be careful. People who walk toward me usually want something." Liana gave a small nervous smile because if she did not smile, she might run. "I do want something." Nico shifted behind her. Liana lifted her hand toward Matteo. "Dance with me." The cathedral forgot how to breathe. Even the candles seemed to still. Matteo's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with disbelief so controlled it almost looked like suspicion. Somewhere behind Liana, someone made a soft choking sound. The priest blinked. Nico looked at her as if she had just stepped over the edge of a building and expected the air to catch her. Matteo looked at her hand. "You understand I cannot stand." "I didn't ask you to stand," Liana said, and her voice was still quiet, but it no longer shook. "I asked you to dance." For a long moment, nothing happened. Liana felt the whole room pressing against her back. She thought Matteo might dismiss her. He had every right to. She was a stranger. Worse, she was a stranger offering kindness in a room where kindness could look like insult. But then something changed at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, exactly. More like the memory of one. "Nico." "Yes, boss?" "Tell the orchestra to play." Nico blinked once. "Now?" Matteo's gaze never left Liana's. "Now." The orchestra stumbled into motion, then found itself. A slow melody rose beneath the cathedral ceiling, delicate at first, then fuller, warmer, almost trembling with its own surprise. Liana did not move behind Matteo. She did not touch the handles of his chair. She did not guide him as if he belonged to her pity. She stepped beside him and placed her hand gently over his. His skin was warm. His fingers were strong. For a second, she felt the faintest hesitation in him, not fear, not weakness, but the strange shock of being offered dignity without performance. Then Matteo moved his chair forward. Liana walked with him. Together they traveled down the aisle under the eyes of every powerful person in New York. It was not a dance the way people expected a dance to be. It was not a twirl, not a show, not a bride's fantasy. It was slower and stranger and more beautiful. Matteo's chair turned with clean, controlled movements, and Liana matched him step for step. She let him lead when he wanted to lead. She moved with him when he shifted. Her hand stayed over his, steady, never heavy. The music wrapped around them, and the laughter in the room died completely. Men who had smiled at his humiliation looked down. Women who had pitied him looked away. Even the cruel man at the back stopped smiling. Matteo glanced at Liana as they passed the front pews. "You've done this before." "My father," she said softly. He lost his leg when I was a teenager. People acted like his life had ended. And did he let them? A sad little warmth moved through her. Some days. Then my mother would put on old music in the kitchen and make him dance with her until he remembered he was still here. Matteo said nothing. Liana looked ahead, blinking hard because the music had found something tender in her chest. He used to say dancing was never really about legs. It was about trust. This time Matteo did not answer, but his hand shifted beneath hers. Not much. Just enough that his fingers touched hers back. When the music ended, the final notes floated up into the painted ceiling and disappeared among the saints. Liana stopped beside him, near the altar. She released his hand slowly, suddenly afraid that the magic of the moment would collapse and leave her standing there as nothing more than a foolish server who had forgotten her place. "Thank you," she whispered. Matteo looked at her like she had given him something he had not known he was starving for. "No," he said. "Thank you." The cathedral remained silent for 3 more seconds. Then Nico began to clap. It was quiet at first, a single measured sound from a man who looked like he had not applauded anything in years. Then someone else joined. Then another. Soon the sound filled the cathedral, not wild, not joyful, but stunned and almost reverent. Liana stepped back, overwhelmed by it, and Matteo watched her go, with a look no one in the room knew how to read. By sunset, New York had already turned the wedding into a weapon. Every news channel had a headline: "Runaway Mafia Bride, Romano Empire Shaken, Crime King Abandoned at the Altar." Images of the cathedral doors played again and again, always stopping before the moment that mattered. The world wanted humiliation, not grace. It wanted the empty aisle, not the dance. It wanted Matteo broken, not Matteo moving through the room with a woman who had refused to let strangers define him. Inside Matteo's private estate, north of the city, no television was allowed to speak. The house sat behind iron gates and long rows of black trees, its windows glowing softly against the dark. Guards moved along the grounds with dogs, cameras watched the road. Inside, the library smelled of leather, old paper, and rain. Matteo sat beside the fireplace, still wearing the wedding suit, though his tie had been loosened. He had said very little since leaving the cathedral. That worried Nico more than shouting would have. Nico entered carrying a tablet. "We recovered part of the deleted footage." Matteo looked up. The firelight moved over his face, making him look carved from shadow. "Show me." The screen flickered. Grainy footage appeared from a service hallway near the east entrance of the cathedral. Sofia De Luca came into view, still wearing her wedding gown, the veil pushed back from her face. She was not crying. She was not panicked. She walked quickly but calmly, lifting the hem of her dress so it would not drag. A black car waited near the curb where no car should have been able to wait. A man opened the door. Sofia looked at him, and even through the poor footage, Matteo could see her smile before she got inside. Nico paused the video. Carlo De Luca, her uncle. The room seemed to lose warmth. Matteo stared at the frozen image. He planned it. Yes. Nico swiped to another file. And not alone. Money moved through shell companies for months. Small amounts at first, then larger. Payments went to camera technicians, cathedral staff, and 3 men inside our own circle. Matteo took the tablet. Names appeared on the screen, familiar names, men who had eaten at his table, men whose children had received gifts from him, men who had bowed to him, laughed with him, called him brother, and sold him by inches while smiling. Nico watched his face carefully. They wanted you humiliated in front of every family. Matteo handed back the tablet. His expression had gone calm in a way that made the room feel dangerous. No, they wanted everyone to believe I could be humiliated. There is a difference? Matteo turned toward the tall windows. Beyond the glass, New York glittered in the distance, bright and restless, a kingdom built on hunger. Somewhere in that city, Sofia De Luca was hiding. Somewhere, Carlo was drinking to his own cleverness. Somewhere, men who owed Matteo everything were waiting to see if the chair, the bride, the laughter, the headline, all of it had finally made the Romano name weaker. Yes, Matteo said. One is an injury, the other is an invitation. Nico stepped closer. What do you want done? For a moment, Matteo did not answer. His mind returned, uninvited, to Liana Brooks, standing in front of him, with her hand extended, cheeks flushed, body trembling, dignity burning brighter than all the candles in the cathedral. She had not tried to rescue him. She had not looked at him like a broken thing. She had simply stood beside him and made the entire room see what they had tried not to see. His enemies had made one mistake. They had mistaken silence for surrender. Matteo looked back at Nico. Prepare the Romano Foundation Gala. Nico frowned. The same gala we cancelled after the wedding? We are not cancelling anything. You want to invite them back into one room? Matteo's eyes were calm now, cold enough to quiet the fire. I want the De Lucas. I want the judges. I want the bankers. I want the governors. I want every man who smiled in that cathedral and every man who paid to make me look weak. Nico understood slowly, and a hard smile touched his mouth. You want witnesses? No, Matteo said. I want the truth to have nowhere to hide. 3 days later, Liana Brooks received a cream-colored envelope at the small apartment she rented above a closed flower shop in Queens. Her name was written across the front in black ink, clean and elegant. At first, she thought it was a mistake. People like her did not receive envelopes like that. People like her received late notices, grocery coupons, and letters from medical offices that still had her father's name in their system. She opened it standing beside her kitchen sink, still wearing her work shoes, with her coat half off, and her dinner cooling in a takeout container on the counter. Inside was an invitation to the Romano Foundation Gala. There was no explanation, no note, no demand, only her name, the date, the place, and a small card beneath it that held one sentence in the same careful black ink. You stood beside me when the room wanted me alone. Liana sat down slowly. Outside, traffic moved through the wet street. Somewhere below, a man laughed into his phone. Her refrigerator hummed. The ordinary world kept going as if nothing had changed, but Liana knew better. Something had shifted the moment she walked down that aisle. She had stepped into a room full of monsters and offered a dance to the one man they all feared, and now that man had remembered her name. She touched the card with her thumb, feeling a soft, impossible tremor move through her. Wonder, fear, and something dangerously close to hope entered her chest together. And far away, inside his guarded estate, Matteo Romano looked over the final guest list for the gala and stopped when he saw her name near the bottom. Liana Brooks. Temporary server. No family power, no title, no protection, no reason to matter to anyone in his world, except she did. He rested his hand against the wheel of his chair, his expression unreadable. Then he gave the order. Make sure Miss Brooks has a gown. Chapter 2. Make sure Miss Brooks has a gown. Nico looked up from the guest list, his face giving away nothing, but his silence said enough. In Matteo Romano's world, a gown was never only a gown. It was permission, protection, a message wrapped in silk. If a woman arrived wearing something chosen by the Romano house, then everyone in the room would understand that she had not wandered in by accident. She had been invited. She had been noticed. She was under his eye. And in New York, being under Matteo Romano's eye could either save your life or end it. The gown arrived at Liana's apartment 2 days before the gala, carried by a quiet woman with silver hair and a kind face, who introduced herself as Mrs. Bellamy, the head housekeeper at the Romano estate. She did not look around the apartment with judgment. She did not stare at the cracked paint near the window or the little stack of unpaid bills beside the microwave. She simply stepped inside with a long black garment bag over one arm and a small velvet box in her hand. Liana stood frozen near the kitchen table, still wearing leggings and an old sweatshirt with flour on the sleeve from the bakery shift she had picked up that morning. She had expected maybe a call, maybe a note telling her the invitation had been some strange mistake. She had not expected a gown. Mrs. Bellamy hung the garment bag on the back of the bedroom door and unzipped it slowly. Deep blue fabric spilled into view, soft and rich, the color of the sky right before night takes over. Liana stared at it without speaking. It was not the kind of dress made to hide a body. It had shape. It had weight. It had a neckline that framed the shoulders gently, long sleeves made of sheer fabric, and a waist designed to follow her curves instead of fighting them. The skirt fell in smooth, heavy waves, elegant without being loud. Liana touched the fabric with careful fingers, as if it might vanish if she believed in it too quickly. "I cannot wear this," she whispered. Mrs. Bellamy smiled as if she had heard those exact words from women in mirrors for most of her life. "It was made for you." "No, I mean I really cannot wear this. I am not one of those women. I do not know how to walk into a room like that. I do not know how to stand beside people who think a dress costs more than my car." "Mr. Romano did not ask me to dress one of those women," Mrs. Bellamy said softly. "He asked me to dress you." Liana looked down at herself, at the soft roundness of her stomach beneath the sweatshirt, at the hips she had spent years turning sideways in narrow spaces, at the arms she had hidden under cardigans even in summer. Her throat tightened. She thought of the cathedral, of every eye landing on her body before her face. She thought of Matteo looking at her differently, as if the room's rules did not apply to him and therefore did not have to apply to her either. Mrs. Bellamy opened the velvet box. Inside were simple pearl earrings. Not diamonds, not something sharp or cold. Pearls, soft and glowing. "He said you should not feel borrowed," she said. "He said you should feel honored." Liana laughed once, but it broke in the middle. That sounds like something a dangerous man says when he is trying not to sound kind. Mrs. Bellamy's smile faded into something gentler. "He is dangerous. You should never forget that. But he does not give honor lightly." On the night of the Romano Foundation Gala, the Grand Aurelia Ballroom glowed above Fifth Avenue, like a palace built out of glass and gold. Chandeliers floated over the room in bright circles of light. Tall windows reflected the city back at itself, all glitter and darkness. There were white flowers on every table, champagne in crystal flutes, and music so soft it felt like a secret. But beneath the beauty, fear moved quietly. It slipped between polished shoes and silk gowns. It rested in the pauses between conversations. Everyone had come because Matteo had invited them, and no one refused Matteo Romano twice. The same families from the cathedral were there, the same judges, the same bankers, the same men with friendly faces and dead eyes. But tonight, there was no bride waiting behind closed doors, no priest, no altar, no easy story for the newspapers. Tonight felt different, cleaner, sharper. People smiled, but they watched the doors. They lifted glasses, but their fingers were tense around the stems. Every guest seemed to understand that the first wedding had been a question, and this gala would be Matteo's answer. Liana arrived just after the hour turned. A black car had collected her from her apartment, and the driver had spoken only once, to tell her that Mr. Romano was already inside. That knowledge had stayed with her all the way across town, beating quietly under her ribs. Now she stepped through the ballroom doors in the blue gown, her hair pinned softly away from her face, the pearl earrings glowing at her ears. For one strange second, no one recognized her. Then recognition passed through the room like a candle flame catching silk. That's her. The server. The woman from the cathedral. The one who danced with him. Liana heard the whispers, and her first instinct was still to shrink. Old habits reached for her shoulders. Her body wanted to fold in, to become smaller, easier, less visible. Then she saw Matteo across the room. He was near the windows in his black chair, wearing a midnight suit and a silver tie. Nico stood beside him. A few powerful men hovered nearby, pretending to speak casually while waiting for the right moment to ask questions they were afraid to ask. Matteo was listening to none of them. His eyes were on Liana. He gave her one small nod. It was not dramatic. It was not romantic in the way silly stories made romance look, but it steadied her more than any grand speech could have. Liana lifted her chin and walked into the room like she had a right to take up space there. The gown moved with her. The whispers followed, but they no longer felt like chains. They felt like wind against a locked door. Mrs. Bellamy appeared beside her with a warm hand at her elbow. "You look lovely, dear. I feel like everyone is waiting for me to trip, then disappoint them." Liana let out a quiet laugh, and the sound loosened something inside her. At the far end of the ballroom, Sofia De Luca entered beside her Uncle Carlo. The mood shifted at once. Sofia wore silver, but the color did nothing for her. She looked pale beneath her careful makeup, her eyes moving too quickly from face to face. Carlo, however, looked pleased with himself. He was a broad man with a handsome older face and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He greeted people as if this gala were his victory lap, as if returning to the room after humiliating Matteo made him brave instead of foolish. Matteo watched him with perfect calm. Nico leaned down. He brought extra men. Of course he did. "Do you want them removed?" "No." Matteo's eyes moved briefly to Liana, then back to Carlo. "Let him feel safe." The music faded at exactly the right moment, not suddenly, but gently, as if the room itself had decided to listen. Nico stepped onto the low stage near the center of the ballroom. He did not need to tap the microphone. He simply stood there until the conversations died one by one. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth and controlled, "Matteo Romano." No one clapped at first. They waited. That was what people did around Matteo. They waited to understand the cost of each gesture. Then Matteo moved forward. His chair rolled across the polished floor without sound, carrying him into the center of the ballroom. No spotlight followed him. He did not need one. The room found him anyway. He stopped beneath the chandelier and looked at the guests who had come to see whether a king could bleed twice. "3 weeks ago," Matteo began, "many of you watched me be abandoned." The words were quiet, but they landed heavily. "Some of you pitied me. Some of you mocked me. Some of you celebrated before you even left the cathedral." No one moved. Carlo's smile tightened. Matteo continued, "I allowed it." A low murmur passed through the room. Because people reveal themselves when they believe a man has fallen. They say what they would never say to his face. They smile too soon. They take money too easily. They stand beside him for years, then sell him the moment they think his shadow has grown smaller. The screen behind him lit up. The cathedral footage appeared. Sofia moving through the side hallway. Sofia lifting her wedding dress. Sofia walking toward the black car. Carlo opening the door. Sofia smiling before she got inside. The image froze there, her smile bright and terrible. A soft gasp moved through the ballroom. Sofia lowered her head. For Carlo gave a sharp laugh. "A runaway bride is not a crime, Matteo. Embarrassing, yes, but not a crime." Matteo did not look at him. "No. Fear is not a crime. Betrayal is common, but payment leaves a trail." The screen changed. Documents appeared. Bank transfers, shell companies, offshore accounts, names, dates, amounts. The air seemed to leave the room all at once. Several men near the back turned toward the exits. The doors were already closed. Nico stepped down from the stage. No one leaves. One of the captains whose name had appeared on the screen went pale. Another cursed under his breath. A judge set down his champagne with a trembling hand. Reporters near the wall lifted their cameras, suddenly understanding that they were not there for society news. They were there for an execution done without bullets. Carlo's face lost its color, but his voice grew louder. "This is theater. You lost your bride, and now you want revenge." Matteo finally looked at him. "Revenge is loud. Truth is quieter. I prefer quiet things." Carlo stepped forward, anger breaking through his polished mask. "Truth? Fine. You want truth?" He pointed toward Matteo's chair, and the room seemed to freeze before the words even came. "The truth is, she left because no woman wants to spend her life pushing a husband who cannot stand beside her." The insult struck the room like a glass dropped on marble. Liana felt it in her own body, her hands curled at her sides. For a moment, she was back in every room where someone had spoken about bodies as if they were public property. Every job interview where eyes dropped to her waist. Every family party where a relative turned concern into cruelty. Every stranger who thought shame was useful if they called it honesty. She looked at Matteo, afraid of what the words might have done. He did not flinch, but he looked at her, not for rescue, not for permission, just for one steady point in a room full of poison. Liana did not rush forward. She did not speak for him. She did not make him smaller by trying to defend what did not need defending. She simply stood where she was in the blue gown and looked back at him, unashamed, unmoved, present. Matteo turned to the room. "When I was young," he said, "I believed power meant standing above other men. I believed the body was a weapon. Height, speed, strength, those things mattered to me once." His hand rested on the wheel of his chair. "Then bullets taught me what most men never learn. A body can change in 1 minute. A spine can break. Legs can fail. The world can decide, in a single afternoon, that you are now an object of pity. Men who feared you yesterday may look at you tomorrow and wonder if they should still kneel." No one spoke. Matteo's voice stayed calm. "I built my empire from this chair. I protected families from this chair. I ended wars from this chair. I buried enemies from this chair. My body changed. My will did not." The silence after that was deeper than applause. He looked at Sofia. "You did not leave because I was less of a man. You left because your family feared what kind of man I still was." Sofia's face crumpled. For weeks she had probably practiced silence, but shame has a strange way of weakening when truth gives it a door. Her lips trembled. Carlo turned toward her with a warning in his eyes. She spoke anyway. "My uncle planned it," she said, her voice thin at first, then stronger when she saw every camera turn. "He said if Matteo looked weak, his allies would turn on him. He said the families were tired of being ruled by a man in a chair. He paid the captains. He arranged the cameras. He told me if I did not leave, he would make sure my mother lost everything." Carlo shouted her name, but it was too late. The side doors opened. Federal agents entered in dark suits, followed by financial crimes officers carrying warrants that had been prepared with care. There were no gunshots, no screaming, no bodies on the floor, only evidence, only names, only the cold, clean sound of powerful men realizing that fear could not save them from paper. Carlo was seized first. He fought for dignity longer than he fought the agents, smoothing his jacket even as his wrists were held behind him. As they led him past Matteo, he leaned close enough for one final act of poison. "They will always pity you." For a moment, no one responded. Then Liana began to clap. It was soft. One pair of hands in a giant room. A small sound, almost fragile, but it carried. Nico joined next. Mrs. Bellamy followed. Then the priest from the cathedral, who had been standing near the back with quiet eyes. Then a reporter, then a banker's wife, then an old union man with scars across his knuckles. The applause grew, not wild, not forced, not frightened. It became warm, human, different from the clapping in the cathedral. That applause had been surprise. This one was recognition. Matteo did not look at Carlo. He looked at Liana. And for the first time that night, his face softened. After the arrests, the city changed its story, because the city always changed its story when the stronger headline arrived. The runaway bride became the De Luca conspiracy. The humiliated crime king became the untouchable Romano. The chair that gossip had used as a symbol of weakness became something else entirely. People spoke about the gala for weeks. They spoke about the evidence, the locked doors, Sophia's confession, Carlo's face when the agents came in. But in quieter corners, people also spoke about the woman in the blue gown who had clapped first. 6 months later, the Romano Foundation opened 3 new rehabilitation centers across New York. They were built in Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx, in neighborhoods where people were used to being offered sympathy long after they needed resources. Each building had wide doors, warm lights, therapy pools, dance rooms, counseling offices, job training classrooms, and kitchens that always smelled faintly of coffee and fresh bread. Above every entrance, carved into pale stone, were the same words: "Dignity does not belong to one kind of body." Liana read those words often. At first, she read them like a person checking to see if something impossible was still real. Then she began to read them like a promise she was responsible for keeping. Matteo had asked her to help shape the foundation's dance and confidence program, and Liana had nearly laughed because she was not a therapist, not a celebrity, not someone with letters after her name. But Matteo had only looked at her with that quiet certainty of his and said that the world had enough experts who knew how to speak over people. He wanted someone who knew how to stand beside them. So Liana learned. She trained. She listened. She built classes for veterans learning how to trust new limbs, for children in wheelchairs whose parents still cried in parking lots, for amputees angry at mirrors, for fat girls who wore black in summer because someone once told them bright colors were not for them, for older men who had survived strokes and believed tenderness had left their bodies forever. She taught them all in a dance room with smooth wooden floors and sunlight coming through tall windows. She never told them movement had to be graceful. She never told them confidence had to be loud. She taught them to claim 1 inch, then another, to breathe, to laugh when they lost rhythm, to understand that taking up space was not rude. It was proof of life. And Matteo came often, though never at the same time, and never with announcement. Sometimes he watched from the doorway, silent as always, while Liana helped a little girl in a pink wheelchair spin beneath a string of paper stars. Sometimes he sat with veterans after class and talked about pain without making it noble. Sometimes he donated money with one hand and threatened contractors with the other when ramps were built too steep or doors too narrow. He remained Matteo Romano, dangerous, controlled, feared. But around the foundation, something in him seemed less armored. Not softer, exactly. More honest. Liana and Matteo never spoke about love at first. Love felt too small a word for what was growing between them. What they had began with respect, deepened through trust, and turned slowly into something neither of them could ignore. He sent a car when she worked late, but he never ordered her into it. He walked beside her in his chair through hallways full of children and nurses and old men who no longer stared at him with pity because Liana had taught them better. She brought him coffee too sweet for his taste, and he drank it anyway. He made her laugh when no one else was close enough to hear. She argued with him when his pride turned sharp. He listened, even when listening cost him. One spring evening, the foundation held another gala. It was smaller than the one at the Grand Aurelia, warmer, filled not with enemies waiting in corners but with families, doctors, donors, dancers, staff, and people who had once believed rooms like this were not built for them. There were flowers, but not too many. Music, but not too loud. The dance floor was wide and open. Liana wore a soft green gown this time, simple and beautiful, with her hair loose around her shoulders. She still felt a little uncomfortable in expensive rooms, but she no longer tried to disappear inside them. Near the middle of the night, the orchestra began playing a familiar melody. Liana stopped moving. It was the same melody from the cathedral. The room slowly parted. Matteo waited in the center of the dance floor, his chair angled toward her, his hand extended. He wore black again, but tonight there was no wound hiding beneath the suit. No abandoned altar, no enemies smiling into champagne. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. "May I have this dance?" Liana smiled, her eyes already shining. "You finally asked properly. I had a good teacher." She walked to him and took his hand. This time no one whispered, no one laughed, no one looked at them like they were strange or sad or inspiring in that empty way people used when they did not know how to simply call something beautiful. They watched because they understood. Matteo moved forward, and Liana moved with him. The dance was slow, familiar, and full of quiet history. Her hand rested over his the way it had in the cathedral. But tonight, there was no trembling in it. His fingers curved around hers with calm certainty. Halfway through the song, Matteo stopped. Liana looked down at him, confused, still smiling. Then he reached inside his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. The room drew in one soft breath. Liana's hand flew to her mouth. "Matteo." He opened the box. Inside was a simple diamond ring, bright but not loud, elegant but not cold. It looked like something chosen by a man who had learned the difference between owning and honoring. "I spent most of my life believing loyalty was proven through fear," Matteo said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were not cold now. They were open in a way that made Liana's chest ache. "Then you walked toward me when everyone else watched me bleed." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I cannot promise you a peaceful life," he continued. "I cannot promise that the world will always be kind, or that my name will ever become simple. But I can promise you this. I will never make you feel small. I will never ask you to hide. I will never let anyone turn your body into an apology. And I will spend every day honoring the woman who saw me before she saw my chair." Liana laughed through her tears, because if she did not laugh, she might fall apart completely. That was almost too good. His mouth curved. "Almost? You are still a mafia boss. I cannot let your ego get comfortable." For the first time in front of everyone, Matteo laughed. It was low and real, and so unexpected that Nico, standing near the edge of the floor, looked briefly toward the ceiling, as if thanking every saint who had survived the Romano family. Matteo looked back at Liana, softer now. "Will you dance with me for the rest of my life?" Liana looked around the room. 6 months earlier, she had walked into a cathedral as a temporary server, carrying champagne no one thanked her for. She had been a fat woman in a plain black uniform, used to being ignored until someone needed something. She had watched a powerful man be wounded by the same kind of cruelty that had followed her through her own life, and for one impossible moment, she had decided not to stay in the background. Now she stood in the center of a room that did not ask her to shrink. She looked at Matteo, at the man who had once ruled through fear, and now offered her his hand like a vow. "Yes," she whispered, "I will." The applause rose around them, warm and endless. Mrs. Bellamy cried openly. Nico clapped with the proud exhaustion of a man who had survived too many wars to be embarrassed by tenderness. Children from the dance program cheered near the front, and one little girl spun her wheelchair in a bright circle until her father laughed and cried at the same time. Matteo slipped the ring onto Liana's finger. Then he took her hand again. The orchestra continued. And together, they danced. Not like a king and the woman who saved him. Not like a wounded man and a woman who pitied him. Not like two people proving anything to anyone. They danced like two souls who had learned that shame only wins when you obey it. The city outside remained hungry. Men still made deals in dark rooms. Enemies still whispered. Power still moved through New York like a river under the streets. Matteo Romano would always be dangerous. Liana Brooks would always remember what it felt like to be invisible. But neither of them belonged to those old stories anymore. He had taught her that being seen by the right person could feel like stepping into light. She had taught him that strength was not standing tall. It was refusing to let the world decide your worth. And when the final note faded, Matteo kept her hand in his, and Liana stayed beside him, smiling through her tears as the room rose to honor them. This time no one watched them with pity. This time no one waited for them to fall. This time the woman who had once served champagne in the shadows danced beside the most feared man in New York, and the whole city finally learned that dignity was not something given by beauty, power, money, or perfect bodies. Dignity was something claimed, and together they claimed it. In rain-soaked New Orleans, power did not always arrive with gunfire. Sometimes it moved quietly behind velvet curtains, under golden chandeliers, through old halls where rich people laughed too loudly and servants learned to keep their eyes low. Sometimes power wore a black suit, stood in the shadows of an opera balcony, and watched an entire room pretend it was safe. Dante Bellamore owned that kind of power. He did not need to shout. He did not need to threaten. The city already knew his name, and the men who forgot it usually disappeared before sunrise. The Bellamore Opera House stood in the oldest part of the city, where the streets shined with rain and the air smelled of wet stone, river water, and expensive perfume. Its tall windows glowed like warm amber eyes against the stormy night. Outside, black cars rolled up one after another, their tires hissing across the pavement as drivers opened doors for women wrapped in silk and men hiding secrets behind polite smiles. It was the night of the Bellamore Charity Masquerade, the grandest event of the season, where old money, new money, and dirty money all gathered under one painted ceiling to prove how generous they could look in public. To the newspapers, Dante Bellamore was a wealthy patron of the arts, a man who saved historic buildings, funded music programs, and kept the old soul of New Orleans alive. To the guests walking into his opera house, he was charming, private, and untouchable. But beneath the soft music and the glittering masks, everyone understood the truth. Dante controlled the docks, the casinos, the private clubs, and the quiet roads where certain trucks were never stopped. He controlled favors, debts, judges, and men who were not afraid to bleed for him. He was the kind of man people thanked with trembling hands. High above the main floor, behind a curtain of dark red velvet, Dante watched the party unfold from the upper balcony. He stood perfectly still, one hand resting on the carved rail, his black mask doing little to soften the sharp beauty of his face. His dark hair was combed back from his forehead, his tailored suit cut close to his broad shoulders, and his expression was calm enough to frighten anyone who knew him well. Around him, his guards stood at a respectful distance, silent as statues. Below, the orchestra played something slow and aching, the kind of music that made people feel noble while they lied to one another. Dante hated these events. He hosted them because they were useful. A charity gala brought enemies into the light. It made greedy men drink too much, made proud women speak too freely, and made nervous families expose how badly they needed money. Tonight, the Duvals had come in full costume and full desperation. Auguste Duval, once the proud owner of a fading casino empire, smiled from table to table like a man trying to sell the last clean piece of his soul. His daughter, Vivienne, floated through the room in a pale gold gown that looked like it had been made to remind other women they did not belong. Down below, far from the orchestra and the champagne, Marisol Reyes moved through the backstage hallway with a sewing kit in one hand and a basket of costume ribbons in the other. She wore a plain black uniform that pulled across her soft stomach and thick arms, no matter how often she tried to smooth it down. Her dark curls were pinned back in a messy knot, and a few tired strands clung to her damp cheeks. She had been on her feet since early morning, hemming gowns, fixing masks, carrying garment bags, and answering to people who never bothered to say her name. Marisol had learned to become quiet. Quiet women were harder to notice, and women who were not noticed were sometimes safer. At least that was what she told herself when guests looked at her body first and her face second. She was used to the small cruelties, the quick glance at her hips, the little smirk when she bent to pick something up, the soft laugh from women who believed hunger was a virtue and thinness was proof of character. Marisol had no energy left to fight every insult. She was tired in a way sleep could not fix. Still, she worked with care. Her fingers were skilled, even when they ached. She could repair a torn seam in minutes and make a cheap costume look expensive under stage lights. Once, long ago, those same hands had kneaded dough beside her husband in the tiny kitchen of their apartment, while he talked about the bakery they would open one day. Matteo used to say she had magic in her hands. He said she could make flour, thread, and broken things behave. Marisol tried not to think about that anymore. Memory was dangerous when a person had nothing soft to land on. 8 months had passed since Matteo died, and still grief lived inside her like a second heart. Some days it beat quietly. Some days it slammed against her ribs until she could hardly breathe. He had died in a world she wanted nothing to do with, a world of favors and guns and men like Dante Bellamore. Matteo had trusted Dante like a brother. Marisol had never understood that. To her, Dante was the shadow at the edge of every peaceful dream, the reason men like Matteo got pulled away from warm kitchens and into cold streets. After the funeral, she vanished. She changed her phone number, left her apartment, stopped speaking to people who knew Matteo's name, and took whatever work she could find. Pride kept her moving when food ran low. Fear kept her hidden when old contacts came looking. She refused every offer of protection because protection from men like Dante always came with a chain attached. She would rather be poor and free, she told herself. She would rather sleep in a rented room with a leaking ceiling than live behind gates paid for by blood. But freedom had become heavy. Every month seemed to close around her. Jobs vanished after one interview. Rent rose without warning. The bakery where she had worked part-time shut its doors after sudden inspections and strange complaints. Marisol told herself it was bad luck, then worse luck, then the kind of luck that followed women who had no one left to defend them. By the time the opera house hired her for temporary backstage work, she was too tired to question why the position had opened so suddenly. She needed the money. So she came. A sharp voice cut through the backstage hall just as Marisol finished pinning a dancer's sleeve. "You, seamstress, come here." Marisol turned and saw Vivian Duval storming toward her in a rush of gold satin and fury. Even without her mask, Vivian looked like a portrait of someone raised to believe the world was furniture arranged for her comfort. Her gown glittered under the backstage lights, but a long tear ran near the side seam, exposing the inner lining. 2 guests followed behind her, eager for a show. A few performers stopped whispering. The servants nearby suddenly became very busy pretending not to watch. Marisol set the ribbon basket down and stepped forward. "I can fix it. Give me just a few minutes." "A few minutes," Vivian snapped, her pretty face twisting. "Do you understand what this dress costs? Do you understand anything at all?" Marisol opened her sewing kit with careful hands. "I'm sorry it happened. If you stand still, I can close the seam before anyone notices." Vivian let out a cruel little laugh. "Before anyone notices." Everyone already noticed. Maybe if you people knew how to do simple work, I would not be standing here humiliated. Heat rose in Marisol's cheeks, but she lowered her eyes. She could feel the room listening. She could feel every glance landing on her body like a pinch. "I'll make it right." Vivian stepped closer, her voice dropping but not enough to hide. You should worry about making yourself right first. Look at you, stuffed into that uniform like the buttons are begging for mercy, and you think you can touch my gown?" A few people laughed softly. Marisol's fingers tightened around the needle. The old shame rose fast, familiar and bitter. She wanted to disappear into the wall. She wanted to turn into smoke. But she stood there, breathing through the hurt, because she needed the job, and because poor women did not get the luxury of pride in rooms owned by rich ones. "I said I can fix it," Marisol whispered. Vivian's eyes flashed. "Do not talk back to me." "I wasn't. You were." Vivian grabbed the torn fabric and shoved it toward Marisol. "Fix it now, and if you ruin it more, I swear I will make sure no one in this city hires you again." Marisol reached for the seam. Her hands shook from exhaustion, but she steadied them. The tear was clean. Easy. She could repair it quickly if Vivian would just stop moving. But Vivian jerked back, making the fabric pull again. "Careful," Marisol said, before she could stop herself. The word hung in the air. Vivian's face went cold. "Did you just correct me?" Marisol looked up. "No, I only meant the fabric." Vivian shoved her. It happened so fast Marisol had no time to catch herself. Her heels slipped on the polished floor. Her body fell backward into a costume rack, sending masks, capes, and silk flowers crashing down around her. Pain shot through her shoulder. Her sleeve tore at the seam. The sewing kit scattered across the floor, needles shining like tiny bits of broken moonlight. Then something small and silver slipped from inside her torn cuff. It skidded across the floor, spinning once, twice, before landing near the edge of the backstage carpet. The room went silent. Marisol stared at it, and her breath stopped. The silver saint medal looked painfully small under the bright lights. She had kept it hidden for months, stitched inside her sleeve, because wearing it around her neck hurt too much. Matteo had carried it for years. After his death, it was the only thing of his she could keep close, without breaking apart every morning. Vivian looked down at the medal with irritation, not understanding why the air had changed. "What is that cheap little thing?" From the upper balcony, Dante Bellamore stopped breathing. He had seen the fall. He had seen the woman hit the floor. But it was the medal that froze the blood in his veins. Even from above, even through the distance and the soft blur of stage light, he knew it. Silver, worn edge. St. Michael on one side, a small mark near the chain loop where a bullet had once grazed it years ago. His hand tightened around the balcony rail until his knuckles paled. No? The orchestra continued playing in the ballroom, but for Dante, all sound thinned into nothing. He remembered the night he gave that medal to Matteo Reyes. They had both been younger then, foolish enough to think loyalty could protect them from every bullet. Dante had pressed the medal into Matteo's hand after a war on the docks, and told him, "For my brother, until the last breath." Matteo had laughed, called him dramatic, and worn it anyway. Matteo had died 8 months ago in an ambush meant for Dante, and his widow had vanished. Dante had searched, quietly at first, then with growing desperation. He had sent men through churches, hospitals, boarding houses, bakeries, shelters, and old neighborhoods where Matteo once had friends. Nothing. Marisol Reyes had become a ghost. Part of Dante had wondered if she had crossed the country, if she had remarried, if she had found some small, clean life beyond his reach. Part of him had hoped she had, because the alternative was worse. Now she was here, on the floor of his opera house, hungry, humiliated, and shaking under the laughter of people who should have been on their knees asking forgiveness. Dante moved before anyone could speak. He left the balcony with a quiet order to his men, and the backstage door opened moments later. The shift in the room was instant. People who had been smirking suddenly straightened. Servants lowered their eyes. Guests stepped back without knowing why. Even Vivian turned, annoyance still on her face, until she saw him. Dante Bellamore walked into the backstage hall like the storm had followed him inside. He did not look at Vivian. He did not look at the guests. His eyes were fixed on Marisol. She was still on the floor, one hand pressed to her torn sleeve, her face pale with fear and shame. When she recognized him, all the blood seemed to leave her body. Dante lowered himself beside her. The sight of him kneeling made the room go completely still. He picked up the silver medal with careful fingers, as if it were something holy. For one moment, he only held it in his palm. Then he turned it over and read the engraving on the back. The words cut deeper than any knife. For my brother, until the last breath. His jaw hardened. Not with anger at her, never at her. The anger turned inward first, hot and sick, because Matteo had trusted him. Matteo had died for him, and Dante had failed the one promise that mattered. Marisol, he said softly. Her name passed through the room like a secret door opening. Marisol's eyes filled with panic. Don't. Dante looked at her torn sleeve, the bruise already rising on her arm, the deep exhaustion under her eyes. Are you hurt? She tried to sit up without taking his hand. I'm fine. You are not fine. Vivian gave a nervous laugh, trying to reclaim the room. Mr. Bellamore, I'm sure this is very dramatic, but she ruined my dress and then made a scene. Dante did not turn his head. Be quiet. Vivian blinked. Excuse me? Only then did Dante look at her. It was not a loud look. It was not wild or theatrical. It was calm, and that made it worse. Vivian took one step back before she seemed to realize she had moved. You put your hands on her, Dante said. Vivian swallowed. She is staff. Dante rose slowly, still holding the medal. She is Marisol Reyes. The name meant nothing to most of the guests, but it meant everything to the men standing behind Dante. His guards stiffened. One of them lowered his gaze as if in respect. Another's face went hard with recognition. Vivian glanced around, suddenly unsure. I don't know who that is. No, Dante said. That is your problem. You rarely know the value of what you touch until it is too late. My father will hear about this, she snapped, but her voice had lost its strength. Your father came to my house tonight begging for money, Dante said. He came smiling, pretending the Duval Empire was not rotting beneath his shoes. Your casinos are drowning in debt. Your private clubs are mortgaged twice. Your family needs my signature to survive the month. Vivian's lips parted, but no words came out. Dante stepped closer, his voice still quiet. You and your father are now banned from every Bellamore property in Louisiana. The opera house, the casino floors, the clubs, the docks, the restaurants that buy from my vendors, the hotels that use my security, all of it. You can't do that, Vivian whispered. I already did. He lifted one hand, and two guards appeared beside her. They did not grab her roughly. They did not need to. The threat was in their silence. Vivian looked from Dante to Marisol, and finally understood that she had not insulted a helpless seamstress. She had stepped on a grave and smiled while doing it. As the guards escorted Vivian away, the room remained frozen in shame. The guests who had laughed at Marisol now stared at the floor. No one apologized. People like them rarely did unless forced, but fear lowered their heads, and for that moment it was enough. Dante turned back to Marisol. His expression softened in a way no one in that room had ever seen. Let me help you up, he said. Marisol stared at his outstretched hand like it was a trap. I don't need anything from you. I know, he said. Take it anyway. Her pride fought him. Her grief fought him harder, but her body was weak, her shoulder hurt, and the entire room was watching her tremble. Slowly, painfully, she placed her hand in his. Dante helped her stand with such care that it almost broke her. He did not pull too hard. He did not make her feel heavy. He simply steadied her, one hand at her elbow, the other holding the silver medal, like a promise returned too late. "I can walk alone," she whispered. "I am sure you can," he said, "but tonight you will not have to." Marisol looked away, because kindness from him felt more dangerous than cruelty from anyone else. She wanted to hate him cleanly. She wanted him to remain the villain in her memory, the man whose world had swallowed her husband. But the guilt in his eyes was real, and that made everything harder. Dante guided her through the backstage corridor, away from the staring guests and the fallen costumes. His men moved around them in a quiet shield. The opera music faded behind them, replaced by the low rumble of rain against old stone walls. They were halfway to the service exit when Dante stopped. Marisol felt it before she understood it. The air changed. His hand tightened gently around her elbow. One of his guards shifted his coat aside, revealing the dark shape of a weapon. Near the loading entrance, beyond a stack of crates and folded chairs, a shadow moved where no staff member should have been standing. Dante's eyes narrowed. The shadow vanished into the rain. For a long second, no one breathed. Marisol looked up at Dante, fear crawling cold through her chest. "What is it?" Dante did not answer right away. He watched the empty doorway, his face unreadable, but something in him had gone very still. Too still. The kind of stillness that came before violence. Then he looked down at the medal in his hand, then back at Marisol. And in that moment, the truth began to form behind his eyes. Her arrival at the opera house had not been luck. Her hunger had not been random. Her suffering had not been invisible to the world. Someone had been watching her. Someone had been waiting. Dante stepped closer, placing himself between Marisol and the rain-dark service entrance. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low enough that only she could hear it. "No one in this city is going to touch you again. No one in this city is going to touch you again," Dante said, and for one strange second, Marisol believed him. Not because he was gentle, not because he was kind, but because the rain itself seemed to listen when he spoke. The service entrance behind them stood open to the storm, letting in the smell of wet brick, river mud, and something colder beneath it. His men moved without a word, spreading through the hallway like shadows with purpose, while Marisol stood frozen beside him with the silver medal pressed between his fingers, and the old life she had tried to bury rising around her like floodwater. She wanted to pull away from him. She wanted to tell him he was too late, that promises did not mean anything after a coffin had already been lowered into the earth. But her knees felt weak, and her shoulder throbbed from the fall, and some part of her understood that the shadow near the loading entrance had not been a lost worker or a curious guest. Someone had been waiting in the rain. Someone had known she would be here. The thought made her stomach twist with a fear so deep and quiet it stole her voice. Dante turned to one of his men, a tall, silver-haired guard named Lucien, and spoke in a low tone. "Seal the building. Pull the cameras. Nobody leaves through the service doors until I know who was standing there." Lucien nodded once and vanished into the corridor. Marisol finally found enough strength to speak. "I'm not going with you." Dante looked down at her, and the anger in his face softened into something heavier. "Marisol, you can hate me in the car. I don't want your car. I don't want your house. I don't want anything that comes from you. I know. No, you don't." Her voice broke, and she hated that it did. "You don't know what it was like after Matteo died. You don't know what it felt like to open my eyes every morning and remember he was gone. You don't know what it felt like to have men come to my door offering protection, like I was some piece of property being passed from one hand to another." Dante took the pain without defending himself. "You're right." That answer cut through her rage because it was not the answer she expected. She had wanted him to argue. She had wanted him to be cold, proud, easy to hate. Instead, he stood there in the dim service hallway, holding her dead husband's medal, with guilt carved into every sharp line of his face. "I searched for you," he said quietly, "not well enough, not fast enough, but I searched. I didn't want to be found. I know that too." His eyes moved to the open door again, where rain blew across the threshold in silver lines. But someone else found you first. Marisol's chest tightened. What does that mean? It means I am not asking you to trust me forever. I am asking you to stay alive tonight. The words were simple, and that made them harder to refuse. Her pride wanted to stand in the storm and walk back into the city alone. Her body knew better. Her body remembered the months of hunger, the cold rented room, the landlord's threats, the strange way every job had disappeared, the feeling of being pushed closer and closer to an edge she could not see. Dante slipped the medal into her palm and closed her fingers around it. His touch was careful, almost reverent. Matteo would never forgive me if I let you walk out that door alone. Marisol looked at the medal, and grief moved through her so sharply she almost doubled over. Matteo had worn it beneath his shirt every day. He had kissed it before leaving for work, before dangerous meetings, before the last night he never came home. She closed her fist around it and nodded once, not because she forgave Dante, not because she trusted him, but because she was too tired to keep pretending fear was freedom. Dante did not smile. He only placed his coat around her shoulders and led her out through a private passage behind the opera house, where 3 black cars waited beneath the rain. He helped her into the back seat as if she were made of glass, then sat across from her instead of beside her, giving her space even while armed men surrounded the car. The city blurred beyond the tinted windows, all wet iron balconies, yellow street lamps, and empty sidewalks shining under the storm. Marisol held the medal in both hands and stared at it while the life she had built out of hiding disappeared behind her. Dante's estate sat beyond the city, hidden behind iron gates and cypress trees that bent low over a long gravel drive. It was not loud or vulgar like she expected. There were no golden lions, no bright fountains, no showy proof of wealth. The house was old and pale, with deep porches, shuttered windows, and warm lights glowing through the rain. It looked almost peaceful, which made Marisol trust it even less. A doctor was waiting inside, a calm older woman with kind eyes and hands that did not rush. Marisol tried to refuse the exam, but dizziness swept over her when she stood too quickly, and the room tilted. Dante reached for her, then stopped himself before touching her without permission. That restraint, small as it was, made something uncertain flicker inside her. The doctor checked her shoulder, her blood pressure, the bruises on her arms, the shadows under her eyes. When she finished, her expression was gentle but firm. You are severely exhausted. You are undernourished. Your body has been carrying too much fear for too long. Marisol looked away, shame burning behind her eyes. I've managed. Managing is not the same as living, the doctor said. Dante stood near the doorway, silent, but the words seemed to hit him harder than they hit her. After the doctor left, he remained there for a long moment, with his hand resting against the frame, looking like a man staring at the damage from a storm he had failed to stop. Marisol sat on the edge of the guest bed, still wrapped in his coat. Don't look at me like that. Like what? Like I'm something broken. His voice lowered. You are not broken. Then stop acting like you found me in pieces. Dante crossed the room slowly and stopped several feet away. I found you hungry in a room full of people who laughed while you were on the floor. The words struck too close. Marisol looked down at her hands. I did what I had to do. Yes, he said. You survived. But survival should not have cost you this much. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain tapped against the windows. Somewhere in the house, quiet footsteps moved, and doors opened and closed. She could feel the machine of Dante's world waking around her, men pulling records, checking cameras, hunting answers. Finally, Marisol said, Matteo wanted a bakery. Dante's face changed. He was tired. She continued, her voice soft. Not weak, just tired. He wanted mornings instead of midnight calls. He wanted flour on his shirt instead of blood. He used to draw little signs on napkins. Raya's Bakery, fresh bread, strong coffee. He talked about it like it was heaven. She swallowed hard. And then he died in your world. Dante lowered his head. Yes, I blamed you. You should have. That made her look up. He was not hiding from it. That made her angrier, because anger needed resistance to stay sharp. I do not know how to live near violence, she whispered. I do not know how to let a man protect me, when protection is what took my husband away. Dante's eyes lifted to hers. Then I will not ask you to live near violence. I will ask you to let me end the danger around you. Before Marisol could answer, Lucien appeared at the open door. His face was grim. We pulled the opera house cameras. The man at the service entrance was Varelli. Dante went still. Marisol noticed the way the room changed around that name. Even the air seemed to draw back. Lucien continued. Not a scout. A grab team. There were 2 more in the alley. They left when you came down. Marisol's mouth went dry. Grab team? Dante looked at her, and his voice became painfully gentle. They were there to take you. The words did not make sense at first, not her. There was no reason. She had no money, no power, no secrets worth stealing. She was a tired widow in a torn sleeve. But Dante's face told her this was not a guess. Lucien held out a folder. There's more. Dante opened it and read. With every page, his expression grew colder. Marisol watched him, her fear building with each silent second. What? She asked. Tell me. Dante closed the folder slowly. Your bakery job. The place did not close because of bad luck. The health complaints were filed by a company tied to Varelli money. Your landlord received payments before raising your rent. 3 jobs that rejected you had the same outside consultant attached to their hiring process. They trapped you, Marisol. They cut away every option until this temporary position was the only door left open. The room seemed to slip sideways. Marisol stood, then immediately gripped the bedpost as weakness rushed through her. No, I'm sorry. No, she said again, but softer this time, because the truth had already entered her bones. All those months she had blamed herself for not being strong enough, not being smart enough, not being thin enough, pretty enough, fast enough to outrun hunger and grief. She had believed the world had simply forgotten her. But someone had remembered. Someone had watched her suffer and used it like a rope. Dante's voice turned darker. The Varellis knew Matteo's widow was my one living debt. If they took you, they could pull me wherever they wanted. Marisol pressed a hand to her stomach. And Vivienne? Her cruelty saved your life. The thought was so strange and awful that Marisol almost laughed, but the sound came out broken. If Vivienne had not shoved her, if the medal had not fallen, if Dante had not seen it from the balcony, Marisol would have walked out through the service entrance after midnight, tired and alone. The men in the rain would have taken her, and no one would have known until it was too late. Dante turned back to Lucien. Find the money. By dawn, the house had filled with quiet urgency. Phones rang behind closed doors. Men came and went with files, flash drives, and faces like stone. Marisol did not sleep. She sat in the kitchen, wrapped in a soft blanket she did not ask for, watching a housekeeper place warm bread, eggs, fruit, and coffee in front of her. At first, shame kept her from eating. Then Dante sat across from her, not commanding, not staring, just present in a way that made the silence less cruel. You need food, he said. I know. No one here will judge you for eating. Her throat tightened. People always judge. Then they will do it outside my gates. She looked at him, expecting a hard smile, but there was only a quiet promise in his eyes. Marisol picked up a piece of bread with trembling fingers. It was warm and soft, and the first bite nearly undid her. Not because it was fancy, because it tasted like a morning Matteo should have lived to see. By mid-afternoon, Dante had his answer. Auguste Duval had sold the Vorellis information. Not once, many times. Routes, meetings, security changes, private movements. To save his collapsing casino empire, Auguste had traded secrets to the enemies waiting in the dark. One of those secrets had led to the ambush 8 months earlier. Matteo had not died because fate was cruel. He had died because a rich coward had counted his debts and chosen betrayal. When Dante told her, Marisol did not cry at first. She only sat very still. The grief was too large to move. It filled the room, pressed against the walls, entered her lungs. Matteo's death had always been a wound, but now it had a hand around the knife. Auguste Duval, a smiling man in a clean tuxedo. A father who had watched his daughter insult a widow while he begged Dante for money only yards away. Marisol covered her mouth, and the first sob broke through. Dante moved toward her, then stopped again, waiting. This time, she reached for him first. Not because everything between them was healed, not because she had forgotten who he was, but because in that moment, the pain was too heavy to hold alone. Dante knelt in front of her chair, and Marisol bent forward, crying into his shoulder with the medal clenched in her hand. "I thought I was angry before," she whispered. "I didn't know anger could feel like this." Dante's voice was rough. "I know. What are you going to do to him?" The question hung between them. Dante did not lie. "Part of me wants to take him to the river and make sure the last thing he feels is fear." Marisol closed her eyes. "But that is not what Matteo wanted for you," he said, "and it is not what you asked the world to be." She pulled back enough to look at him. "Men like Auguste never pay, unless men like you make them. Then I will make him pay in the light." That night, Dante captured Auguste Duval in an abandoned warehouse near the riverfront, where rain drummed against the rusted roof and the Mississippi moved black and endless beyond the broken windows. Marisol was not supposed to be there. Dante had told her to stay at the estate, safe behind gates and guards. But grief had changed something in her. She was tired of being protected from truths that had already ruined her life. So when the car left, she rode in the second one with Lucien, silent and pale, the silver medal around her neck for the first time in months. Auguste was tied to a chair under a hanging light, his expensive suit soaked with rain, his proud face gray with terror. When he saw Dante, he began begging before anyone spoke. "I had no choice," Auguste cried. "The Vorellis were going to destroy me. My daughter, my family, everything I built. I gave them schedules, that's all. I didn't know Matteo would die." Dante stood before him, still as judgment. "You knew someone would." Auguste's mouth trembled. "Please, I can pay. I can fix this." Marisol stepped out from the shadows. Auguste stared at her, as if a ghost had entered the room. She expected to feel powerful. She expected rage to burn clean through her. Instead, she felt a deep, steady sadness. This was the man who had helped take Matteo from her. This small, shaking man who smelled of fear and old money. There was nothing grand about evil when it finally sat under the light. It was just selfishness with better clothes. "You let my husband die," she said. Auguste began to cry. "I'm sorry." Marisol listened to the words and found they gave her nothing. No peace, no relief. No Matteo walking through the door with flour on his sleeves and that crooked smile on his face. Dante's hand moved toward the gun beneath his jacket. Marisol saw it. "Dante," she said softly. He stopped. The warehouse went silent except for the rain. Marisol looked at Auguste, then at Dante. "If you kill him, he becomes another body in another dark place, another secret, another reason men whisper your name and women like me run from your shadow." Dante's jaw tightened. The war inside him showed plainly in his eyes. "You asked me to believe your power could protect," she said. "Then prove it." For a long moment, Dante did not move. Then slowly, he lowered his hand. August sagged in relief, but Dante leaned close to him, his voice colder than the river outside. "Do not thank her yet." By morning, the city began to shake. Files appeared in the hands of federal investigators, trusted reporters, banking regulators, and judges who owed Dante debts old enough to have gathered dust. Ledgers surfaced, showing Auguste Duval's payments from the Varelli syndicate. Bank transfers exposed the false loans that had kept the Duval casinos alive. Forged contracts connected respectable men to dirty money. Security records placed Duval informants near the route that led to Matteo's ambush. By noon, the Duval family name was no longer spoken with envy but with shock. By evening, Auguste was in custody. The Varelli network was burning in public, and men who had hidden behind marble walls were being dragged into court under flashing cameras. Dante did not bury them. He exposed them, and somehow that frightened the city more. In the weeks that followed, New Orleans changed in ways both loud and quiet. The Duval properties were seized. Varelli men disappeared from corners they used to own, not into graves, but into courtrooms, holding cells, and witness rooms where fear loosened their tongues. Workers who had been cheated by casino fronts began receiving back pay through legal settlements. Women who had been threatened into silence found lawyers waiting for them. The story became too large for even rich families to smother. Then Dante did something no one expected. Every clean asset recovered from the Duval collapse, every legal dollar that could be saved from the wreckage, went into a foundation under Matteo Reyes's name. The Matteo Reyes Foundation opened quietly at first, with offices in an old building near the river. Its purpose was simple. It would help widows, workers, and women trapped by poverty, abuse, and debt. It would pay rent before landlords could use eviction as a weapon. It would fund job training, legal help, medical care, and safe housing. It would turn the money of cowards into shelter for the people they once crushed. Marisol stood beside Dante on the day the papers were signed. She wore a dark blue dress that fit her body without apology. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. The medal rested against her chest. She still did not know what to do with all the feelings inside her. Grief was there. So was anger. So was something new and fragile when she looked at Dante, something she was not ready to name. "You did not have to put Matteo's name on it," she said. "Yes," Dante answered. "I did." She looked through the office window at the wet street below. He would have liked this better than revenge. Dante's voice softened. "I know." A month later, Vivienne Duval came to see her. She arrived without gold silk, without a mask, without the proud lift of her chin. Her family's empire was gone. Her father was awaiting trial. The city that once bowed to her now crossed the street to avoid her. She stood in the doorway of the small bakery where Marisol had started helping in the mornings, her hands twisting around the strap of a plain purse. Marisol almost told her to leave. Part of her wanted to. Part of her remembered the shove, the laughter, the word useless thrown like a stone. But another part of her saw a frightened young woman stripped of the armor that had made her cruel. Marisol did not mistake that for innocence. Pain did not erase harm, but it did reveal what was left underneath. Vivienne's voice trembled. "I came to apologize." Marisol wiped flour from her hands. "Then apologize." Vivienne swallowed. "I humiliated you because I could. Because I thought people like me were allowed to. I was wrong. I am sorry." The bakery smelled of yeast, sugar, and coffee. Morning light glowed through the front windows. Marisol thought of Matteo, of how he used to say, "Bread taught patience, because it could not rise under pressure. It needed warmth. It needed time." "I don't forgive you today," Marisol said. Vivienne's eyes lowered. "I understand. But there's a bakery across town, run by one of Matteo's old friends. She needs someone to wash trays and work the counter. It is honest work. It is hard work. If you treat anyone there the way you treated me, you will be gone before lunch." Vivian stared at her. "You would help me?" Marisol's expression remained calm. "I am not helping who you were. I am giving you a chance to become someone else." That was not weakness. Marisol felt it in her bones as she said it. Mercy did not mean forgetting. It did not mean kneeling. Sometimes mercy was standing strong enough to refuse becoming a mirror of the people who hurt you. Over time, healing came like dawn through heavy curtains, slowly. Then all at once, Marisol began baking again. At first, only for the small shop, then for the foundation's events, then for herself. Late at night, when the world was quiet and memory did not hurt as sharply, she made sweet rolls with orange glaze, soft milk bread, dark coffee cakes, and the little cinnamon knots Matteo had loved. Her body grew stronger, her face filled with color. She laughed sometimes before she remembered to feel guilty for it, and then one day she stopped feeling guilty at all. Dante changed too, though the city would never have believed it. He was still dangerous, still quiet, still a man other men feared. But around Marisol, the sharpness in him learned restraint. He came to the bakery in the early mornings before business began, sitting at a corner table with his coffee, while she worked dough with her strong hands. He never rushed her, never claimed what she had not offered. He simply stayed, steady as a shadow, until his presence no longer felt like a cage. One morning, while rain softened the windows and the ovens warmed the room, Dante finally said the truth that had lived between them for years. "I loved you before Matteo died." Marisol's hands stopped in the flour. Dante did not move closer. "I never touched that feeling. I never fed it. He was my brother in every way that mattered, and you were his wife. So I buried it where I thought it would die." Marisol looked at him then. His face held no demand, no expectation, no hunger dressed as romance. Only truth. "I knew," she whispered. His eyes darkened with surprise. "Not all of it, but I felt something. The way you looked away too quickly when Matteo kissed my cheek. The way you always sent extra guards when he walked me home. I thought maybe I imagined it. You didn't." She looked down at the dough beneath her hands. After Matteo died, love felt like betrayal. Even the thought of feeling anything again made me hate myself. "I would never ask you to forget him." "I know." She took a slow breath. "That is why I can stand here with you." Dante crossed the room only when she held out her hand. He took it gently, his thumb brushing flour from her fingers. The kiss they shared was not violent or desperate. It was quiet, careful, a promise made by two people who understood that love after grief did not erase the past. It grew beside it, tender and stubborn, like green leaves through cracked stone. Months later, Matteo's bakery opened on a bright morning after rain. The sign above the door read, "Rhea's Bakery," in warm painted letters, just the way Matteo had once drawn it on napkins. People lined up along the sidewalk before sunrise. Workers from the docks came first, then women from the foundation, then old neighbors, musicians, lawyers, housekeepers, and men in suits who pretended they were not there because Dante Bellamore stood near the counter. The whole city seemed to arrive hungry. Marisol wore a cream-colored apron over a soft green dress. She did not hide her arms. She did not shrink when people looked at her. Her body, once treated like something to mock, moved with ease and purpose through the bakery she had built from grief, flour, and impossible mercy. Dante watched her from beside the register, quieter than usual, his eyes filled with the kind of devotion that did not need to own in order to protect. Near the counter, inside a small glass case, rested the silver saint medal. Dante had placed it there that morning with Marisol's permission, not as a symbol of death, not anymore. It was proof that love could survive violence, that loyalty could outlive fear, and that a promise made too late could still become something good if carried with humility. When the last customer of the morning rush stepped away with warm bread in hand, Marisol stood behind the counter and looked around the bakery. The ovens glowed, the windows shined, the air was full of butter, coffee, and soft laughter. For the first time in a very long time, she did not feel like a woman running from shadows. She felt rooted, seen, whole. Dante came to stand beside her. Matteo would be proud. Marisol touched the glass above the medal. Her eyes filled, but the tears did not break her this time. He would say the coffee is too strong. Dante smiled, small and real. He always had terrible opinions. A laugh escaped her, warm and surprised, and Dante looked at her as if that sound had saved some hidden part of him. Outside, New Orleans glittered under the clean light after the storm. The city was still dangerous. It was still full of secrets, debts, and men who mistook fear for respect. But inside the bakery, power had taken a different shape. It was not a gun in a dark room. It was not a family name or a fortune hidden behind marble walls. It was a woman who had been shoved to the floor and still chose to rise without letting cruelty harden her heart. Marisol Reyes had endured hunger, grief, humiliation, and danger, but none of it had made her small. She was not the invisible fat widow the city had tried to discard. She was the keeper of Matteo's dream, the heart of a foundation built from ruin, and the quiet force that taught a feared man the difference between revenge and justice. And when Dante reached for her hand beneath the counter, Marisol let him take it, not because she needed saving, because at last she was no longer running. The first thing Nora Bellamy noticed about the most dangerous man in Louisiana was not his eyes, his money, or the silent army of men guarding his riverfront mansion. It was the blood, not much of it. Not enough for the rich guests downstairs to smell through their champagne and gardenia perfume. Not enough to stain the black tuxedo jacket she had been paid to repair. But enough for Nora to know that somebody in that beautiful house was lying, and the lie was already turning warm, wet, and dangerous beneath Dante Moretti's ribs. Rain whispered against the tall windows of New Orleans like the city itself was trying to warn her away. It slid down the glass in silver threads, blurring the lights of the river and the long, dark shapes of boats moving through the night. The Moretti estate sat behind iron gates and ancient oak trees, grand and quiet, with white columns, black shutters, and balconies wrapped in wet vines. It looked like the kind of place where old money came to die politely, but Nora knew better the moment the car brought her through the gate. The guards were too still. The cameras moved too smoothly. The men at the door wore suits that fit like church clothes, but their hands rested too close to their jackets. This was not a house. It was a fortress pretending to be a home. Nora had been in beautiful rooms before. She worked nights in the back of a small alteration shop off Magazine Street, sewing up the torn hems, broken zippers, and split seams of women who wore dresses worth more than her rent. Rich women came in smelling like powder, wine, and expensive flowers. They handed over silk gowns without looking at her face, speaking to the shop owner as if Nora were part of the furniture. She was used to that. At 29, Nora had learned that being poor made people look through you, and being fat made them think they had already seen enough. She moved quietly. She kept her head down. She mended what other people ruined. Then she went home before sunrise to the small apartment she shared with her younger brother Eli, where pill bottles lined the kitchen windowsill, and medical bills waited in a neat, cruel stack beside the coffee maker. That night, she had almost said no to the job. The call had come after midnight, just as she was locking up the shop with aching fingers and thread caught in the sleeve of her faded cardigan. A man with a polished voice said there had been an emergency wardrobe issue at a private gala. A tuxedo jacket had torn. The client would pay triple for immediate work and absolute silence. Triple was not a luxury to Nora. Triple was Eli's next treatment, part of the rent, and maybe one full week where she did not have to choose between groceries and gas. So she packed her sewing kit, tucked her dark curls under a scarf, and climbed into the black car waiting at the curb, telling herself that rich men tore clothes all the time, and none of it had anything to do with her. Inside the estate, the air was too cold and too sweet. White lilies filled massive vases along the marble hall. Crystal chandeliers poured soft light over polished floors. Somewhere below, a string quartet played a gentle song that felt too clean for the fear moving through the walls. Nora followed a narrow-shouldered man up a curving staircase, while laughter rose from the ballroom like bubbles in a glass. She caught glimpses of the guests as they passed the landing. Women in pale gowns, men in black suits, diamonds at throats, hands folded over secrets. Everyone was gathered for the same reason, though no one said it openly. Dante Moretti was supposed to announce his engagement to Serafina Vale, the daughter of a rival family whose name carried its own quiet warning. Their marriage would end a feud that had filled graves on both sides of the city. It would join two violent worlds under one roof. That was the story the guests had been fed. Peace wrapped in satin, blood hidden under flowers. The man leading Nora stopped before a closed door at the far end of the hall. 2 guards stood outside it, their faces empty. One of them looked her over in a way she knew too well, his gaze slowing on her hips, her stomach, her heavy arms under the loose black sweater. He did not bother hiding the smirk. "This is the seamstress?" he asked. Nora did not answer. Men like that enjoyed making people react. She had spent too many years learning how not to give them the pleasure. The smaller man knocked once, then opened the door before anyone answered. "She's here," he said softly. The room beyond was warmer than the hall, and darker than it should have been. Heavy curtains covered the windows, though the storm still glowed behind them in pale flashes. A tuxedo jacket lay across the back of a chair, one side hanging loose where the seam had split beneath the arm. A silver tray sat untouched on a table, holding a glass of water, folded linen, and a small bowl stained pink at the rim. 3 men stood near the fireplace, speaking in low voices that stopped the second Nora entered. And then there was Dante Moretti. He stood in front of a tall mirror, dressed in black trousers, a white shirt, and no jacket. He was not the largest man in the room, but every other man seemed arranged around him like furniture around a fire. He had dark hair brushed back from a hard, beautiful face, and eyes so calm they made Nora think of deep water at night. His shirt was buttoned wrong near the middle, not by accident, but by haste. One hand rested lightly against his side, too lightly, carefully. His skin had a faint gray tone beneath the olive warmth, and a line of sweat shone at his temple despite the cool air. Nora looked at the jacket first because that was what she had been hired for. Then her eyes moved to the bowl, the water glass, the faint red smear near the cuff of his shirt. The way his breathing stayed shallow, controlled, almost proud. She felt the room waiting for her to notice only cloth and thread. "Jacket's there," one of the men said. "Fix it fast." Nora set her sewing kit on the table and crossed to the chair. She touched the torn seam, turned the fabric between her fingers, and saw at once that the tear was nothing. A rushed repair, but simple. 15 minutes of work, maybe less. Yet the whole room carried the sharp unease of an emergency ward before a patient crashed. She knew that feeling. She had once lived in it, back when she still wore scrubs and believed she might become someone with a name tag people respected. Before Eli got sick, before tuition became impossible, before life folded her neatly back into survival. She looked over her shoulder at Dante. The jacket is not the problem. The silence that followed was immediate and cold. The guard by the door took one step forward. "You were hired to sew." "I know what I was hired to do," Nora said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not shake. "And I will sew the jacket. But if he puts it on and walks downstairs like that, the seam won't be the thing that opens." Dante's eyes lifted to hers through the mirror. The guard's hand moved under his coat. "Watch your mouth." Nora swallowed, feeling her pulse thud in her neck. Fear was there. Of course it was there. She was not foolish enough to stand in a Mafia boss's dressing room and feel brave all the way through. But she had seen infected wounds before. She had seen proud men insist they were fine until their knees gave out and their blood pressure dropped so fast the monitors screamed. Fear did not change the truth. She turned fully toward Dante. "Your bandage is wrong. It's too tight in one place, loose in another, and it's trapping fluid. You're sweating, you're pale, and you're breathing shallow because the pain gets worse when your ribs move. If that wound is near as bad as it looks from here, you do not need a tailor, you need a doctor." A dangerous hush filled the room. Downstairs, the music changed into something sweeter, almost playful. Dante studied her for a long moment. No anger showed on his face, which somehow made him more frightening. "And you are a doctor?" "No," Nora said. "Not anymore." Something shifted in his eyes. "Not anymore. I trained in emergency medicine before I had to leave school." She glanced at the men around him. "I know enough to see when people are pretending a wound is smaller than it is." One of Dante's men let out a hard breath. "Boss, we don't have time for this. Vale's people are already asking questions." Dante did not look away from Nora. "Come here." The command was soft, but every man in the room obeyed it by moving back. Nora did not move right away. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her sewing kit. She thought of Eli sleeping badly in their apartment, one arm thrown over his face, trying to pretend he was not scared of the next hospital visit. She thought of the bill folded in her purse. She thought of her own body in this room, too large for the narrow ideas rich people had about who should be allowed to speak. Then she lifted her chin and walked toward Dante Moretti. Up close, the truth was worse. The scent of expensive soap and clean cotton could not hide the faint sour heat of infection. His shirt was damp near his side, where a careless wrapping had been tucked beneath the fabric to keep it hidden. Nora set her hands near the bandage but did not touch him yet. "I need to see it." A guard cursed under his breath. Dante's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. "You give orders very easily for a woman surrounded by men with guns." Nora looked up at him. "Pain makes people stupid. Infection makes them worse. Guns do not change that." For the first time, something almost human moved across his face. Not amusement exactly. Interest. He gave a small nod. Nora unbuttoned the lower part of his shirt with steady hands, though her palms were damp. The bandage beneath was a mess. White gauze pressed too harshly into swollen skin. Dried blood stuck along the edge. The wound near his ribs had been stitched fast and badly, the skin angry around it, the center tight with trapped infection. Whoever had treated him had cared more about keeping him upright than keeping him alive. She breathed out slowly. "Who did this?" "No one who will do it again," Dante said. "That does not fix what they already did." "No," he said. "I suppose it does not." Nora opened her kit. It was meant for fabric, not flesh, but years of habit had made her carry more than thread. Small scissors, clean cloth, alcohol wipes, a sealed needle pack from an old first aid pouch she kept for emergencies. Not enough for a proper clinic, but better than whatever foolishness had happened in this room. She asked for hot water, more clean towels, and real disinfectant. The men looked to Dante. Dante nodded once. They moved. While they worked, Nora spoke to him the way she had spoken to scared patients in the emergency room before her life changed. Calm, clear, no soft lies. "This is going to hurt. It already hurts. It will hurt more." His eyes stayed on her face. "Then do what you have to do." She cleaned her hands, then began peeling away the old dressing. Dante did not flinch, but the muscles in his jaw locked so hard she could see the strain. The men watched her, as if she were cutting the wire on a bomb. Outside, thunder rolled over the river, deep and slow. She cleaned the wound, inch by careful inch. opening what had sealed wrong, letting the trapped fluid drain, pressing until the angry heat gave way to fresh blood. Dante's breath roughened once, only once. Nora did not praise him for staying quiet. She had never believed silence was the same as strength. "You can make a thing look whole for one night," she said as she worked, mostly to keep his mind steady, maybe to keep her own hands from remembering that this was Dante Moretti beneath them. A dress, a sleeve, a wound. But if the inside is wrong, the outside never holds. The damage just waits for the worst possible moment. Dante's gaze sharpened. "You speak from experience?" "I mend clothes for women who would rather throw away a person than admit a zipper broke." She threaded the needle with care. "So yes. And what do you do when something is too ruined to mend?" Nora pressed the clean cloth near his side and met his eyes. "I tell the truth. Some people hate that." His voice lowered. "Do you?" "Hate the truth?" She shook her head. "No. I hate what people do to avoid it." For a moment, the room felt smaller. The rain, the low music below, the armed men, the waiting families, all of it seemed to fade around the strange quiet between them. Dante looked at her not like a servant, not like a mistake sent to the wrong room, not like a fat woman who should be grateful to be ignored. He looked at her as if she had opened a locked door inside him, and he had not yet decided whether to punish her or thank her. Nora finished the stitching with small, even pulls. Her fingers knew tension better than most people knew prayer. Not too loose, not too tight. Enough room for healing, enough hold to keep him from bleeding through his shirt before morning. When she tied the final knot, Dante looked down at her hands. "You are very good at hiding fear," he said. Nora packed away the needle. "No, I'm not. People just mistake quiet for weakness." A faint smile touched his mouth, then disappeared. "They do that often?" "All the time." His eyes moved over her face, down to the soft curve of her shoulders beneath the worn sweater, then back to her eyes. There was weight in that look, but not the kind that made her want to shrink. It was too direct, too awake. It made her suddenly aware of the rain in her hair, the tiredness under her eyes, the body she had spent years trying to make less noticeable in rooms exactly like this one. The door opened, and the narrow-shouldered man stepped in again, pale with worry. "Sir, they're ready. The Vales are waiting. Miss Vale is already in position." Dante reached for his shirt. Nora caught his wrist before she could think better of it. Every gun in the room seemed to breathe at once. Dante looked down at her hand on his skin. Slowly, very slowly, his gaze rose to hers. "If you go downstairs now," Nora said, "you may make it through the announcement. You may even look strong while you do it. But your body has already told you no. If you ignore that, you are gambling with more than pride." The man at the door spoke quickly. "Sir, canceling now would be an insult. Both families are here. The press is waiting outside the gates. Serafina's father will see it as a betrayal." Dante kept looking at Nora. "And what do you see it as?" She let go of his wrist. "A man deciding whether he wants to survive the night or perform for people who do not care if he bleeds under his clothes." Something in Dante's face went very still. Nora knew she had gone too far. A poor seamstress in a borrowed black car did not speak to men like him that way and leave untouched. Yet Dante only turned toward the mirror, studying his own reflection as if seeing a stranger dressed in his skin. The feared boss, the promised groom, the living weapon wrapped in silk and expectation. Then he said, "Leave us." No one moved. Dante's voice did not rise. "Now." The men cleared the room. The narrow-shouldered one backed out last, his face tight with panic. When the door shut, the music from below became softer, distant as a memory. Nora stood beside the chair, with the torn jacket still waiting behind her. "I still need to fix the seam." "No," Dante said, "you do not." She blinked. "I was paid to repair it." "You repaired what mattered." There was nothing gentle in the way he said it. It sounded more like a sentence passed over both of them. Nora picked up her sewing kit because she did not know what else to do with her hands. Her heart was beating too fast now, and the room felt too warm. Dante crossed to the window and pulled the curtain back. Below, the garden glowed beneath white tents and rain-slick lanterns. Guests moved like pale ghosts across the lawn. At the center of it all stood Serafina Vale, beautiful and still in a silver gown, waiting to become the bridge between two empires. Dante watched her for a moment, then he let the curtain fall. "Go home, Nora Bellamy." She froze. "I never told you my last name." He turned his head slightly. "No one enters my house without me knowing who they are." Fear moved coldly through her again, but beneath it came something stranger. Of course he knew. Of course this house swallowed names before people crossed the door. She wondered if he knew about Eli. The thought made her grip the handle of her kit until her fingers hurt. Dante seemed to read the change in her face. "You will be paid tonight. More than promised. I only want what was agreed." "I know," he said quietly. "That is why you will receive more." Nora should have thanked him. She should have lowered her eyes, taken the money, and vanished back into the rain. Instead, she found herself looking at the fresh bandage beneath his open shirt, at the man holding himself together because everyone around him had mistaken suffering for power. "Change the dressing tomorrow," she said. "Clean hands, real disinfectant, no drinking, no tight wrapping. And if the fever gets worse, you need a hospital, no matter how many men with guns say otherwise." Dante's mouth curved again, softer this time. "Are you always this stubborn? When people are bleeding, yes." For one quiet second, the room did not belong to a mafia boss and a seamstress. It belonged to a tired woman who knew how to mend things, and a dangerous man who had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for without fear. Then the door opened again, and the world returned. Nora was escorted downstairs through a servant hallway, away from the ballroom and its bright, watching eyes. But just before she reached the side entrance, a murmur rose from the main hall. At first it was only confusion, then shock, then the sharp, breaking sound of rich people realizing the story they had come to witness had been taken from them. A servant hurried past, whispering to another. He cancelled it. Nora stopped beneath the shadow of the staircase. The second servant crossed herself. Mr. Moretti cancelled the announcement. He told them there would be no engagement tonight. Outside, thunder shook the house so hard the crystal lights trembled. Nora stood very still, rain waiting beyond the door, her sewing kit heavy in her hand. Upstairs, Dante Moretti had chosen not to walk into the room that expected him to bleed politely for peace. Downstairs, two families who had dressed their hunger in silk were learning that one small act of honesty could ruin an entire empire's plan. Nora stepped out into the wet New Orleans night and pulled her cardigan tight around her body. The black car waited by the drive. Behind her, the Moretti mansion glowed like a haunted palace, full of music that no longer knew what it was celebrating. She told herself she would never return. She told herself men like Dante Moretti were storms, and poor women with sick brothers could not afford to stand in storms. But as the car carried her away from the river, Nora looked down at her hands and saw that they were still steady. And somewhere in that house behind her, a man feared by half the city was touching the bandage she had made, thinking not of the woman he was supposed to marry, but of the seamstress who had looked at his wound and told him the truth. By morning, every quiet corner of New Orleans knew that Dante Moretti had left Serafina Vale standing beneath a white silk canopy with no ring, no promise, and no explanation. The city did not speak of it out loud, not in cafes, not in courthouse halls, not at the docks where men loaded crates before sunrise. But the whisper moved anyway, sliding through rain gutters and back rooms like a thin black snake. The most feared man in Louisiana had refused a marriage that was supposed to end years of blood. Some said he had insulted the Vales on purpose. Some said he had lost his nerve. Some said he had been wounded and was hiding weakness behind locked doors. Only one woman knew the truth, and she was sitting at her kitchen table in a small apartment with damp shoes, sore hands, and a hospital bill folded open beside a cold cup of coffee. Nora Bellamy tried to go back to her life as if nothing had happened. She opened the alteration shop before noon. She pinned hems, fixed torn lace, replaced pearl buttons, and listened while rich women complained about parties, husbands, and dresses that did not forgive dessert. She nodded at the right times. She kept her face calm, but every time her needle slid through cloth, she remembered the feel of Dante's skin beneath her fingers, hot with fever, and held together by pride. She remembered his eyes in the mirror, too still, too watchful, as if he had spent his whole life learning how to stand inside pain without making a sound. She told herself it was pity. She told herself she had cared because he was hurt, and because hurt people had always pulled something stubborn and tender out of her. But late that night, when Eli coughed from his bedroom and asked if she was okay, Nora realized she had been staring at the same unfinished seam for 20 minutes. 3 days passed before Dante sent for her. The car arrived at dusk, quiet and black, parking across from the shop, beneath a street lamp, buzzing with moths. Nora saw it through the rain-streaked window and felt her stomach drop. A man stepped out, not one of the smirking guards from the gala, but an older man with silver at his temples and a face that looked carved from weathered stone. He entered the shop, removed his hat, and said, "Dante Moretti would like to speak with her." Nora almost laughed from pure disbelief. Men like Dante Moretti did not like to speak with women like her. They summoned, they ordered, they owned the room before they entered it. But the old man stood there respectfully, waiting like her answer mattered. "I have work," Nora said. "He knows. I have a brother." He knows that too. That was the part that made her go cold. Nora told Eli where she was going, though not the whole truth. She told him it was a private client, rich and difficult, and Eli looked at her from the sofa with tired eyes too clever for his 22 years. His body was thin from treatment, his smile soft from trying not to worry her. "Don't let them underpay you," he said. Nora kissed his forehead. "I never do." That was a lie, but she said it like a promise. The Moretti estate looked different without the gala lights. The white tents were gone. The flowers had been removed. Rainwater gathered in the low places of the drive, reflecting the house in broken pieces. Inside, the mansion felt less like a palace and more like a body holding its breath. Servants moved quietly along the walls. Doors closed softly. No one laughed. No one sang in the kitchen. The curtains were drawn even though the day had not fully died, and every room seemed to be waiting for permission to exist. Dante stood in the library, one hand resting on the back of a leather chair, his black shirt open at the throat. He looked better than he had the night of the gala, but not well. His color had returned, though his movements were careful. Nora's eyes went to his side before she could stop them. "You changed the dressing?" she asked. A faint smile touched his mouth. "Before hello?" "Hello? Did you change the dressing?" "Yes." "Correctly?" His smile deepened, as correctly as a man can when he is being watched by 6 terrified employees. Nora looked around the dark library, at the shelves of untouched books and the dust gathered along the window frames. This house needs sunlight. Dante watched her, as if she had just said something far more dangerous than an insult. This house needs many things. Then he offered her a job. Private medical aid, he called it. Wardrobe keeper, household repair, and personal care. The words sounded almost ordinary, but nothing in the room was ordinary. The salary he offered was enough to pay Eli's treatments for months. Enough to breathe, enough to sleep without doing math at 3 in the morning. It was the kind of money that could save a person and trap them at the same time. Nora listened without touching the contract on the desk. "I will not carry messages. I will not hide weapons. I will not lie to police, judges, wives, girlfriends, enemies, priests, or anyone else. I will not become part of your business." The silver-haired man by the door went very still. Dante tilted his head. "You make rules in my house? I make rules for myself. And if I refuse? Then I leave." There it was again, that strange look in his eyes, like she had placed something warm in his hands and he did not know whether to keep it or crush it. He looked down at the contract, then back at her. Accepted. Nora should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the door of her old life closing softly behind her. The first weeks inside the Moretti estate were not romantic, not at first. They were strange and heavy, and full of small wars. Nora opened curtains that had not been touched in months. She learned the names of the maids, the drivers, the cooks, the guards, and the quiet boy who polished the silver with shaking hands. She found closets full of expensive shirts missing buttons and coats thrown away for tiny tears, and she mended them because waste offended her. She walked into the kitchen one morning, found a tray of untouched food meant for Dante, and carried it to his study herself. "You need to eat," she said. "I am working. You are healing. I have survived worse." That is not the same thing as living better. He stared at the bowl of chicken and rice, like it had personally betrayed him. Then, slowly, he ate. It became a pattern. Nora did not flatter him. She did not whisper around him. She checked his wound, changed his bandages, scolded him when he drank, and told him when he looked tired. The first time she called him foolish for holding a meeting while feverish, every man in the room looked ready to vanish into the wallpaper. Dante only stared at her, then dismissed the meeting. By the end of the month, the staff had stopped lowering their eyes so quickly. Someone opened a window before Nora asked. Someone left fresh flowers in the hall. The house began to breathe. The change became impossible, to ignore the night they brought Raffi in. He was barely 19, thin as a fence rail, with a split lip and oil under his fingernails. 2 guards held him by the arms, while Silas Crow, Dante's oldest advisor, stood beside the fireplace with a face as calm as old stone. Silas was a narrow man with pale eyes and careful hands. He had served the Moretti family for nearly 20 years. People spoke of him with respect, but Nora felt something colder under it. Fear, maybe, or habit. "He stole from the South shipment," Silas said. "A public lesson would settle the docks." Raffi trembled so hard his knees nearly gave out. Dante sat behind the desk, expression unreadable. Nora was there to check the bandage after the meeting, but something in the boy's face held her still. It was not greed she saw. It was hunger. It was fear. It was the look of someone who had been pushed until every door behind him disappeared. "What did he steal?" Nora asked. Silas turned his head slowly. "This does not concern you. It concerns me, if you expect me to patch him after." One of the guards looked down. Dante's eyes lifted to Nora. "Speak." She kept her voice soft. "Desperate people make desperate choices, when nobody gives them another way out. If you punish the hunger and ignore who created it, you will keep getting thieves. You will just make them better at hiding." Silas's mouth tightened. "Mercy invites weakness." "No," Nora said. "Mercy shows you know the difference between a threat and a trapped boy." The room seemed to lean toward Dante. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he stood, walked to Raffi, and asked what debt had put him on the shipment floor in the first place. The answer came out in broken pieces. A sick mother, a loan shark, interest that grew while the boy slept. Dante listened. Then he told Silas to pay the debt, clear the boy's name, and send him to one of the mechanics at the lower yard for training. Raffi stared at him like he had been handed the moon. Silas looked as if Nora had opened a window during a funeral. After that night, Dante began speaking to Nora in quieter places, on balconies after rain, in the kitchen when the house was asleep, in the dressing room where she first saved him. He told her about his parents, murdered when he was 15, and the uncle who taught him that grief was something a man buried before enemies could smell it. He told her he had been raised on one lesson repeated until it became law. Softness gets you killed. Love gives people a handle to hold while they drag you down. Nora listened with her sewing basket in her lap, repairing the lining of one of his old coats. "Armor can stop one knife," she said, "but if you never take it off, it becomes a prison." Dante looked at her hands. "And what would you know about armor?" Nora smiled a little, but it was not a happy smile. "I wear mine in plain sight. Loose sweaters, quiet voice, no expectations. People think they are ignoring me, but really, they are telling me everything." That was how she found the ledger. It was hidden in a locked sewing room at the back of the estate, a room no one used anymore. Nora went looking for spare buttons and found dust, old fabric, and an unfinished suit hanging beneath a sheet. The suit was beautiful, black wool, hand-stitched, abandoned before completion. Something about the lining felt wrong, too heavy. Nora opened the seam carefully and found a small ledger tucked inside, wrapped in oilcloth. The name written on the first page was Mara DeLune. Mara had been the household accountant before Nora arrived. The staff said she ran away. Silas said she was unstable, but the numbers in the ledger told a different story. Money was missing from Moretti accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger. Quiet streams flowing toward shell charities, fake medical funds, and accounts tied too closely to Silas Crow. When Nora brought it to Dante, his face closed like a door. "Where did you get this?" "In the sewing room." "Who told you to look there?" "No one." His suspicion cut deeper than she expected. "Do you think I planted it?" "I do not know what to think." Nora placed the ledger on his desk with both hands. "Then think carefully, because Mara found this before me, and now Mara is gone." The anger in his face cracked. Not gone fully, but enough for grief to show beneath it. He reached for the ledger, and Nora saw the exact moment doubt entered him. Silas felt it too. The first attack came at Dante's casino during a charity night, bright with gold lights and false smiles. Nora was there because Dante had insisted, and she had agreed because his wound was still healing, and because somewhere along the way, his safety had stopped feeling like work. His usual private table had been moved near a glass balcony. The lighting was wrong. The security flow was wrong. Nora noticed because mending had trained her eyes to catch what did not belong. A curtain shifted across the room during a sudden blackout. A tiny red point slid over the glass. She grabbed Dante and pulled him down with all her weight, just as the shot cracked through the dark. Glass burst above them in a glittering rain. People screamed. Guards rushed in. Dante covered her body with his before she could breathe. Later, in the armored car, with sirens fading behind them, Nora spoke the truth neither of them wanted. "Someone inside changed your table, your route, and your time." Dante's jaw was hard. "Many people know my habits. One person controls them." He did not say Silas's name. He did not have to. Silas answered by reaching for the one thing that could break her. The package arrived at Eli's apartment 2 days later. Inside was expensive medication, the kind Nora had been trying to afford for months, along with a note written in clean black ink. "Stop pulling threads before the whole cloth tears." Nora broke in the hallway outside Dante's office, not gently, not prettily. She sank to the floor with the note in her hand and sobbed because Eli had never asked for any of this, because poverty had made every kindness suspicious, because she had walked into a storm and brought it home. Dante knelt in front of her, not caring who saw. He took the note from her shaking hand and read it once. His face went pale with rage, but his voice, when he spoke to her, was low and steady. "He will be moved tonight, protected, hidden somewhere even Silas cannot reach." "This is my fault," Nora whispered. "No, I should have left after the gala. If you had left, I would still be bleeding in a dark room while traitors planned my funeral. She looked at him through tears. Dante touched her cheek with the careful hand of a man who had broken many things and was afraid of breaking one more. No one touches your brother. No one touches you. The words were not possession, not this time. They were fear, real fear, naked and human. That was when Nora knew. Dante Moretti did not protect her because she was useful. He protected her because somewhere between bandages, meals, windows, and truth, he had started to love her. Neither of them said it, not yet. The charity masquerade at the Vale Mansion came under a moon hidden behind clouds. Nora wore a simple dark blue dress. She had altered herself, one that fit her body instead of apologizing for it. Dante stood beside her, his hand resting at the small of her back, and the room noticed. Of course it did. People stared at her soft arms, her full hips, her plain hair, her brown skin warmed by candlelight. Their smiles were sharp, their whispers sharper. Serafina Vale found Nora near a balcony lined with white roses. She was beautiful in a silver mask, cool and polished, the kind of woman people expected beside Dante. She looked Nora up and down without cruelty at first, only confusion. "You know they are laughing at you," Serafina said. "I know. And you came anyway?" Nora looked across the ballroom at Dante, who was speaking to men who feared him and watching her at the same time. "I have been laughed at in cheaper rooms." Serafina's mouth tightened. "You have no bloodline here, no fortune, no beauty that this world understands." "No," Nora said calmly. "I do not, but I give him something this world never gave him." "And what is that?" "A reason to live as a man instead of a weapon." Serafina looked away first. Later, she found Nora in a side hall, her silver mask gone and her perfect face shaken. The truth came out in whispers. The engagement had never been peace. It was a door. Once married, Serafina would have opened Dante's empire from inside, and her father, with Silas beside him, would have taken it apart piece by piece. She had agreed because she had been raised to obey, decorated like a gift and moved like a pawn. But Dante's refusal had cracked the board, and Nora's presence had made Serafina see the cage around her own life. "Silas is done waiting," Serafina said. "He is not planning a quiet takeover anymore." The hurricane arrived the following night. By sunset, New Orleans was drowning in wind. Rain struck the estate sideways, hammering the shutters, bending the oaks until their branches clawed the windows. Power failed across the city, and the Moretti mansion fell into emergency darkness. Most of Dante's guards had been sent away by false orders before anyone realized the messages were not from him. The phones died one by one. The gates opened from the inside. Silas came through the storm like a ghost who had been living in the walls the whole time. He brought armed men, old secrets, and Eli. Nora saw her brother dragged into the great hall with rain in his hair and terror in his eyes, and the world narrowed to a single sound, her own breath. Dante stepped in front of her, wounded side tense beneath his shirt, his face calm in the way deep water looks calm before it takes a man under. Silas stood at the foot of the staircase, dry under a black coat, as if the storm had chosen not to touch him. "You were always sentimental, Dante. Your uncle warned me you would be if someone found the right seam." Dante's voice was deadly soft. "Let the boy go." "In exchange for everything?" "Yes." Nora grabbed Dante's arm. "No." He did not look away from Silas. "Yes." Silas smiled. "That is the sad part. I believe you would. For her. For that tired little seamstress I placed in your path." The words hit the hall like thunder. Nora stared at him. Silas looked pleased with himself. "Did you think fate brought you here? I arranged the call. I chose you because no one notices a poor fat woman who fixes clothes. You had medical training, debt, and a sick brother. Perfect shape for a tool, easy to pressure, easy to use. Eli made a broken sound. Nora, I didn't know. Silas continued, smooth and cruel. The charity that helped with his early treatments was mine. A hook in soft skin. I only needed you close enough to listen. Close enough to guide Dante where I wanted him. But you became inconvenient. Kindness usually is. Nora felt shame rise, hot and choking. Then something stronger came beneath it. Silas had mistaken being overlooked for being empty. He had mistaken need for obedience. He had mistaken a woman who mended torn things for someone who would never tear a lie open. You picked me because you thought I was invisible, Nora said. I picked you because you were. No, she said. I was watching. The fight began with a shout, a flash of lightning, and Dante moving faster than Nora had ever seen. The hall exploded into motion. Glass shattered. Men rushed from the side doors. Eli dropped to the floor as Nora pulled him behind a fallen table. Dante reached them just as Silas raised his gun. The shot struck Dante in the same side Nora had once stitched. For one awful second, he stayed standing. Then his knees gave way. Nora's scream disappeared beneath the storm. She crawled to him, dragging him behind the table while the house erupted around them. His blood soaked through her hands, hot and fast. This time, her hands shook. This time, the man bleeding in front of her was not a dangerous stranger in a dressing room. He was the man who had opened the curtains of his own prison because she told him there was still light outside. Stay with me, she said, tearing open his shirt. Dante, look at me. His eyes found hers, unfocused but trying. Nora. No, you do not get to say my name like goodbye. She pressed cloth to the wound, hard enough to make him gasp. You do not get to die before learning what it means to actually live. Do you hear me? A weak shadow of a smile touched his mouth, always giving orders. Always ignoring them. She stitched in the dark while rain battered the windows and gunfire moved through the house like thunder trapped indoors. Her hands steadied because they had to. Eli held a lamp. A kitchen maid pressed towels into Nora's reach. Somewhere beyond the hall, Silas shouted that it was over, that the Moretti Empire belonged to men who understood power. Then the front doors opened. Rafi came in first, soaked to the bone, a wrench in one hand, and dock workers behind him. Drivers followed, kitchen staff. Groundskeepers, men from the lower yards, women who had served meals in silence for years. People with no titles, no seats at tables, no official power at all. The kind of people Silas had never counted because he had never truly seen them. They came for Nora. They came for the boy Dante had spared. They came because the house had changed, because mercy had traveled farther than fear, because one open curtain can teach a whole room how dark it has been. And Serafina kept the veil reinforcements away. Without backup, Silas's coup folded. His men scattered or surrendered. By dawn, the storm had weakened. Eli was safe, and Dante was carried into emergency surgery with Nora's blood-stained hands pressed together like prayer. He lived. Recovery was slow, not pretty, not grand. Dante slept more than he wanted to. Nora cried when no one could see. Eli confessed through tears that the fake charity had helped him long before any of them understood what it meant. Nora forgave him before he finished speaking. They had both been used by people who knew hunger, made doors look like blessings. When Dante was strong enough to stand, everyone expected blood. Silas was locked in a guarded room beneath the estate, pale with fury, still certain the old world would return if Dante only remembered who he was. But Dante did not kill him. Instead, he gave the ledgers, the accounts, the names, and the proof to federal authorities. He exposed Silas, the veil operations, and his own family's sins with one stroke. Men called him weak. Old allies called him insane. Enemies called him finished. Dante listened to none of them. He chose truth over revenge, and for the first time in his life, he let the empire bleed honestly. The fall was not gentle. The Moretti name lost power. The Vale family cracked open under investigation. Serafina left New Orleans quietly, without diamonds, without guards, without asking permission from any man. Dante shut down what could not be saved and rebuilt what could. Restaurants, shipping contracts, real work with clean books and open doors. He lost fear, and with it, he lost many people who had only respected the monster. But he kept the ones who mattered. Nora returned to medical training, not because she wanted to become someone else, but because she was finally allowed to become the woman she had been, before desperation interrupted her. Near the docks, in a low brick building that used to store broken equipment, she opened a clinic for workers, immigrants, mothers, drivers, kitchen hands, and anyone too poor to be seen quickly anywhere else. Dante created a fund for young people trapped by family debt and street promises, giving them trade training, school help, and a clean way out. Raffi became the first success story. Grease on his hands, pride in his smile, and no fear in his eyes when he walked through Dante's door. 1 year after the night Nora first entered the Moretti estate, Dante stood in the same dressing room, while sunlight filled the windows. No curtains hid it now. The house smelled of coffee, fresh bread, and something sweet baking in the kitchen. Eli was healthier, laughing somewhere downstairs with Raffi and the staff, who no longer moved like ghosts. The room where Nora had once found blood beneath a tuxedo now held folded shirts, repaired coats, and a small vase of yellow flowers on the table. Dante stood before the mirror with his shirt open, touching the scar near his ribs. Nora came up behind him. "I know a doctor who can reduce that." He met her eyes in the mirror. "No, you like being stubborn. I learned from the best." She rolled her eyes, but her smile softened. Dante turned to face her. He was still dangerous in the way storms are dangerous even when the sky clears. But he was not hollow anymore. Not a weapon waiting for orders. Not a man stitched together with fear alone. "This scar stays," he said. "It is proof that someone saw me bleeding and did not turn away." Nora's throat tightened. "I was just doing what needed to be done. You always say that." He reached into his pocket and took out a small ring, simple and warm in the morning light. No huge diamond, no cold display of power, just a promise made small enough to hold. "So I will say what needs to be said. I cannot promise you a perfect life. I cannot promise the past will never knock on our door. But I can promise honesty. I can promise sunlight. I can promise that no one in this house will ever be invisible again. And I can promise that every day I have left, I will spend becoming the man you believed was still somewhere under the blood." Nora looked at the ring, then at him. Her whole life, people had asked her to shrink, to wait, to serve, to be grateful for crumbs. Dante was not offering crumbs. He was offering the one thing she had never known how to ask for. A life where she could take up space and be loved in it. "Yes," she whispered. Dante closed his eyes as if the word had struck him softer than any bullet and deeper than any wound. He slipped the ring onto her finger, with hands that had once built an empire from fear and now trembled because a seamstress had chosen him freely. They married quietly in the garden after the rain. Eli stood beside Nora, healthy enough to cry and laugh at the same time. Raffi stood with Dante, proud and nervous in a suit Nora had altered herself. The household staff filled the chairs not as servants, but as family. There were no rival bosses waiting in shadows, no engagement alliance dressed up as peace, no music trying to hide blood under the floor. There was sunlight. There was food. There was laughter. There was healing. Nora Bellamy did not become smaller, softer, prettier, richer, or more obedient to earn her place in that story. She became more herself, brave enough to speak, stubborn enough to stay, tender enough to care for wounds no one else dared to touch. She saved Dante Moretti not by turning him into a saint and not by pretending his darkness had never existed. She saved him by refusing to let him mistake pain for power. And in the end, the most feared man in New Orleans did not build her a throne out of blood. He built her a home full of open windows. The woman the world had ignored became the heart of a house that finally knew how to breathe. And every time the rain touched the river, every time thunder rolled gently over the city, Nora remembered the night she walked into that mansion to mend a torn jacket and found a wounded man instead. She had told him bad mending always shows later. She had been right, but good mending showed too. It showed in the clinic lights burning late by the docks. It showed in Eli's easy smile. It showed in Rafi's clean future, in Serafina's freedom, in Dante's scar, in the curtains pulled wide every morning. It showed in a life stitched back together, not perfectly, but honestly, with room to heal, room to breathe, and room for every invisible soul to finally be seen.